And then it's got like that little. It says I'm live. It says I've been live for 2 seconds, but I don't believe it. You know that I don't believe technology. They're gonna get us one day. So now what I do, right? About 3 weeks ago, just for these things, I bought a laptop, another laptop just for this. So now what I do is I go to Twitter, right, and I go to my home page, right, to see if the thing came up. So now I'm scrolling down. Now I have to refresh because it's still not there. So now what I do is I go over here. I click this and see if anything's happening. Now nothing's happened yet. Hold on. People are here, right? I'm telling you, people are here. Watch this. See, people are here. We think. So now what I do is I go here and I go here. Right? I got this down to a science, but not the art form of it. So now this is what I do. Now I go here, and now I'm going to press one more button, right? So take that. I just handed it off to my wife like a football, so she's going to run it. And now I'm going to see on YouTube. Because I'm like you now, I'm on 2 channels. So hold on. And I'm checking on YouTube. We did it. We're live. You know what I do now? Now I turn down my music. But you like this music, right?
Oh, yeah. Sounds kind of like Indian music.
It is. It's Hindi. And it's a 500-year-old poem. And there's 40 lines to it. And Nancy and I usually do it several times a day, except we've been bad. We've really been bad with it. So I turn it down now. And I needed it because you were driving me crazy. You know that, right? You were driving me crazy. I am.
Hey, I'm actually relatively on time for this one.
Are you really?
Oh yeah, I'm usually always about 10 minutes late.
You know, really? Are you? I was.
Yeah. I lived in LA too long.
Yeah.
You can't arrive on time. It's like bad form. It's discourteous to actually be on time.
Yeah. I'm the person who always arrives at the airport with like no time left.
Oh,
right?
yeah, I do that all the time. In fact, my goal is to make it just in time to barely make the flight. Because airports are insane. They're like an extension of insane asylums. You know what I mean? They should just put padded walls in there. There's something about it's a mental, not pleasant.
Okay, so Nancy is the person who wants to get to the airport like 5 hours before. So it's like a crazy thing. There's like so much like friction right then. But we are live. We made it. So I want to thank you so much. I'm really excited about this. There's so much for us to talk about. And I've been wanting to do this Periscope with you for a while now, right?
Yeah. I mean, since not long after you started, I think I was on one of the earlier ones when I think it was Ron Coleman you had on that, I sort of checked in and out on. But I thought, I thought it was a good idea, sort of fun conversation that covers a wide range of topics from a diffuse perspective.
You and I have so much to talk about. So this is like a lunch, right? It's like a dinner time. And a lot of people are going to join us because they've got questions too, right? And I'll
smoke my cigar for this one. I usually don't because I get like people who complain about bad examples or whatever. But I'm on Adam's Periscope, so I think I'm okay.
Listen, you can smoke. You can open up a bottle of whiskey and down it. And I'm cool with anything, almost anything. So would you be kind enough to introduce yourself? Would that be all right?
Sounds good. I'm Robert Barnes of Barnes Law, law firm based out of California, Tennessee, and Wisconsin. Have practiced all across the country. Have appeared pro hac vice in pretty much almost every state of the union, and have actually handled cases across the world, as the case may be, where I'm allowed to appear or be involved strategically at some level. Handle cases of a wide range: civil, criminal, constitutional, trial cases of all kinds. Basically, the only thing that unifies my cases. There's no political ideology that unifies it. There's no partisan alignment that unifies it. It's that they're all underdog cases. So even when I'm representing somebody that may be wealthy, well off, compared to their opponent, they have nowhere near the resources that they do. So if I'm representing Wesley Snipes or Ralph Nader, one of them may be famous, one of them may be well off, but when they're up against the United States government or the state of Arizona, they are definitely the underdog. And so the common theme in my cases, I like to represent underdogs in cases that make a difference in the area of law. Take on about half of my practice each year is pro bono or contingency. Right now, it's probably up to 2/3, which might be a little out of whack, but c'est la vie. to try to make a difference, use the law degree to change the world as best as possible, and then have side hobbies of political gambling and sports betting, which are just sort of fun and my own form of investments, because I can't be as patient as you investor guys.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you mentioned the law, and can I share with people a little bit of that you and I have a nemesis in common? Would that be all right? Because I'm going to show you a picture. I've got this picture, and you're going to love it. It's a flashback. Nancy was the woman of the year for something, I think. Stuart Applebaum. Yeah, Stuart Applebaum. Nancy wants to shout it out, but I'm honest. And Stuart Applebaum, who's the head of one of the big unions, was the man of the year. Chuck Schumer was there. And guess who else was there? This is going to be a flashback. Let's see how good your memory is. These are Nancy's parents. Who's the other guy?
That guy is familiar, but I'm not locating the name.
Okay. Well, two of them, that's Nancy's beautiful mother, Nancy's beautiful father. And that third person is very solicitous, always looking to raise money. We both knew him. And one of your, did you figure it out yet?
I recognize the face. I just can't. The name is not coming to me.
That's Ken Starr.
Oh, really?
That was Ken Starr. He went there.
That Ken Starr. No, not the Ken Starr of Clinton fame. The Ken Starr that I helped ruin. Ken Starr, who's partially in prison thanks to my cross-examination of him. Yes, I should have seen that face. That face of infamy.
I didn't know you cross-examined him.
Oh yeah. That's the Ken Starr from the Wesley Snipes case.
Yeah.
So in fact, Ken Starr was supposed to be the government's key witness. Actually, it was supposed to be his son and some other people, but we employed some trial techniques that disabled their ability to do that. And so instead, they decided to make Ken Starr the day of. In fact, leading in, the way the Snipes case was, it was just insane, top to bottom. I only got the witnesses the night before. I only got their prior testimony the night before. So I had to prepare for their cross-examinations the night before, get like 2 hours of sleep, if that. And the advantage was I could use lunch to prepare for the people that were supposed to come up in the afternoon. Well, that morning, Bobby O'Neill, the prosecutor, figured out that we had already had effective cross-examination material on Ken Starr's son, and a key person who worked with Ken Starr. So he flipped the script and put Ken Starr up first. And I hadn't prepared for him yet because he was supposed to be after lunch. So I had to prepare right there on the spot. Now, I had prepared in general for him. We had been planning information about Ken Starr in our witness list. People were trying to figure out, why did we have this eclectic witness list of Neil Simon and Tom Brokaw and some of these other names on there? It was all about Ken Starr. But for Ken Starr being such an ass, contemptible human being, and a likely fraudster, Snipes doesn't end up in the position he ended up in. It was because he distrusted Starr that led to a bunch of things. And so we knew it from that, but I didn't know the details of his prior testimony. I wasn't prepared for us. So I had to do it right there on the fly. And it became clear in cross-examining him that I wasn't going to be able to trap him substantively. But it was also clear that the guy was a complete ass of a human being. So my whole cross-examination shifted from a substantive cross-examination to an emotive cross-examination, with the goal being to show the jury, do you like this human being? Can you tolerate this human being? Would you want this human being to be your advisor? Can you understand why Snipes hated him? This guy represents the government. He's sort of a substitute for the government, similar to the techniques that Mesereau used in the Michael Jackson defense case to say, do you really like this lady? Do you really trust this lady? Do you want to be on this lady's side? And it was very effective. That jury hated that guy by the end of it. But we also had planted enough stories and subpoenaed enough evidence that we triggered the New York prosecutors opening investigation into what Wes's allegations had been for decades, which was that Starr was systematically stealing from his clients and customers. They hid that evidence through the trial, but ultimately our subpoenas triggered the New York investigation that led to him, hiding in his closet with his new stripper wife when the cops came. And Snipes got a huge kick out of that.
I'm going to do the backfilling on the story for a lot of people. And let me just ask you a question. At the time, did you know what a celebrity he actually was himself, like who his client profile was?
Oh, yes, we knew everything about him. So I didn't know what he had testified to, and I didn't know what lies he would tell, but we knew everything else about him. I mean, we were able to get his son to flip, and his son, and that's what surprised the prosecutor that flipped the script that day.
Wow.
We were able to get a key advisor to
So
flip.
I'm going to go back, Phil. I'm going to go back, Phil, on this. It's really interesting, but we're not going to get lost, and we got so much to talk about, right? So, about, I don't know, 10 years ago or something, 12 years ago, back then I used to read the New York Post. Isn't that crazy? So I think it was like page 2 or something that we know Ken Starr, right? We knew Ken Starr pretty well. He was part of the big dollar Democratic circle, right? And he had all the celebrity clients. He had Uma Thurman. We would go to a lot of parties. Uma Thurman would always be there, Al Pacino, Carly Simon, all the big celebrities. And he was their accountant, right? We knew his auditing shop really well. We would go there. He was even doing Warren Buffett's philanthropy. Did you know that?
Yeah.
And so one day I'm reading a Post, right? I don't read it anymore. I haven't read that thing in a long time. But back then, I used to read it like an animal, right? Like it was like my scripture, right? So I'm reading it, and it said that Uma Thurman, it's like a big story, goes, I think the head was like, I used to keep it.
Kill Bill.
Yeah, something like Uma Thurman goes kill Bill. And she kicked in his door. So his office, right? You walk into his office, and then he had like a partition, and behind that was his conference room and all that type of stuff. She kicked in that door because he embezzled $1 million from her. And that's how I found out. And then I think I saw him at the Regency like 7 or 8 years later. And that was the whole story. I knew that everything was blowing up for him. And then I guess about 5 years ago, I think I'm looking through some old articles. Maybe I'm nostalgic. I don't even know how it happened. And your name was in it. And, I remember Wesley Snipes really well. Everybody in New York City, downtown, used to see Wesley Snipes, right? He was a fixture. And so it was kind of like you and I have there's like 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. You and I have like a 1 degree, right? It's kind of amazing. It's kind of amazing.
Oh, I mean, his whole story, the people that were covering for him, what's amazing is Uma Thurman would have never had her money stolen from her. A lot of other people wouldn't have had their money stolen from them if the New York DA's office had not ignored Wesley Snipes in the 90s, because he went to them in the 90s saying, this guy is scamming me, this guy is scheming me, this guy's doing funny stuff with real estate. He figured it out before anybody else. But because of the political connections and juice that Starr had, and because Snipes was not taking that seriously because already he was facing collateral pressure from other places politically, they didn't pay attention to him. And then they conspired to cover up his corruption during the trial, which I had strong suspicions of. But we issued so many subpoenas that we got the right people's attention. We just couldn't expose it during the trial, but it did lead to his prosecution afterwards. I mean, this is a guy who dumped his wife on her when she had, was in bad medical condition. She was a John McCain, for people who don't know. I mean, John McCain did that to his wife, and married a stripper from one of those crazy New York strip. It's one of the famous ones that everybody knows. It's got some organized backers for owners.
Yeah.
But she ratted him out right away, and he was hiding behind the curtains in the closet. And Snipes got a huge kick out of that because, I mean, that guy had been his nemesis forever. That guy ended up serving a lot longer than Snipes ever did, and deservedly so. So it was just and righteous to see him undone. But he thought he was immune. We were the first people to really come after him heavy and trigger the right attention to him ultimately, that ultimately led to a good effect. But taking him apart emotionally in front of the jury was ultimately probably the key turning point. There are 2 or 3, but it was one of the 2 or 3 key turning points. If that doesn't happen, we don't win all the felony acquittals and misdemeanor acquittals. We should have won the whole case. 9 of the 12 jurors were for complete acquittal across the board. 3 held out because they lied to get onto the jury in the first place, and the judge let him get away with it. And that's why they cut a deal and convicted him of 3 misdemeanors, assuming he would do no time, as should happen. But the judge is biased against people of certain political beliefs. I called him Boss Hodges. It turned out the local community called him Boss Hodges.
Wow.
And he ended up doing about 2 years, but it was light time. It was, he did a game while he was inside. He taught yoga while he was inside. It was nothing like the movies that he'd been in, which and now he's going to be he's in Coming to America too. which I think came out today.
No way. You know, you and I could talk about it for such a long time, and there's so much to talk about, and that's one of the things, but it's unfair to everybody else, right? Other than to say that I learned 2 lessons, maybe even more, right? But 2 that I remember. And one of them is I bumped into him with his girlfriend at an awards thing, and his girlfriend was inappropriately dressed, right? And we know his wife, and we knew his wife was very sick. And I thought, what a detestable person this is, right? There's just something mentally off with this person.
Ken Starr he was scuzzbag times 10.
So I learned that lesson about, just presentation, even of your own girlfriends or whatever it is, that there's a certain kind of
you don't bring the stripper to the high-end party.
And yeah, there's a certain type of etiquette that people have to be respectful, because that was really bad. And everybody knows his wife, so that even made it worse. And the lesson number 2, which is really important, is that he was commingling his funds, right? He paid for that $4 million apartment because he was commingling his funds. And so I learned another valuable lesson from that. I learned that be very wary of people that live beyond their means, and be wary of somebody who's kind of garish with their wealth. And he was an accountant. Accountants aren't, he was a celebrity accountant nonetheless, but they're not supposed to have that type of money, right? There's something wrong if an accountant has that type of money. He's stealing from somebody. So I learned that lesson. So I learned just, to also be wary of.
He was sophisticated at it too. He was, before the real estate scandals of the 2000s, he was doing that kind of transactions with his own client's property. He would use his client's property to secure loans to himself personally. It was Snipes who disclosed it and discovered it. And if the government hadn't been so corrupt in New York, he would have been caught a lot sooner. But there was no better story than what happened to Ken Starr. And it was all because he thought he could lie against Wesley Snipes for a criminal trial and that everybody would come to his protection. And he was wrong.
So now we're going to talk about other stuff, right? And it's so fun to reminisce about that. And I'm not a nostalgic person, but I just learned so many lessons from that. And I'm sure you did also, right? That's a really...
Oh, absolutely. The Snipes trial was my defining trial. It was not only my coming out party from a PR public perspective, but it was the defining case of my life to a large extent.
You learned a lot.
Impossible odds. He was supposed to go to prison for 16 years, could be completely bankrupted. Family's supposed to be prosecuted, career ruined. None of that happened. And it was the biggest acquittal, according to the press, since Patrick Henry, argued, the give me liberty or give me death effectively, and got that $1 tax fine for a tobacco tax case right before the American Revolution. So it was a great case, famous case. But seeing a scuzzbag like Ken Starr exposed for what he was one of the juicy cherries on top of the dessert.
So I would imagine that one of the lessons you would learn, I learned it years before, right? Just because I came out of Wall Street, was there are certain people that do have certain exemptions from things, right? He knew, and I'm not embellishing it. I mean, but within New York City, and, he knew some of the top lawyers, he knew the top politicians, the Cuomos, right? And Mario Barr. It was just really ridiculous that there really is a power structure here that's its nucleus, its core is politics. And he was very deep in that. And he was a big dollar fundraiser, and he would get it from Warren Buffett. It was just absurd. So did you learn from that? And then we're going to change the subject. But did you learn from that there is a certain amount of prestige that can buy your way out of trouble? Because you were up against some real people.
It's how power operates. And the other aspect is, if you have control, because he was the financial manager for people, the people that don't know, what that allows you to do is to know where money is going. And you can develop blackmail files, Hoover style, on your own clients that can keep them disciplined and quiet. And he just ran into the wrong one in Snipes. But normally they get away with that sort of operation. They know how to pay off. They know who to bribe. They know who to blackmail. I won't disclose it, but I had a client that had some issues like that in LA. So it was a beginning introduction to how the power system really works at a high end. It was a prequel to the TV show Billions, but in real life.
And now we're going to get into politics, but it's also going to be kind of a segue, right? And so You know what? We're not going to get into it because I'm going to bring it up later. I want to just kind of go chronologically, but I want to discuss first this election because there's so much to discuss. We're even going to go before that. You and I were were some of the most vocal people, if you can be vocal on Twitter, about the concerns about the policies with COVID lockdowns, right? It was just you and I and maybe Jordan Schachtel, right?
Initially it was only a handful of us who were saying this is a disaster, this is a debacle, these lockdowns endanger Trump's reelection, open up the opportunity for a challenge, but also are just going to be the most constitutionally devastating set of policies maybe we've ever seen, but definitely in our lifetimes. And that's precisely what we've witnessed. And it took a lot of other people a little while. I consider it a dividing line. Whoever knew how to react quickly to the lockdown issue on the right side tells me they have the right instincts. Anyone that doesn't is someone whose instincts I'll never trust again. But that's why I'll give credit to someone like Mike Cernovich. Cernovich was initially concerned about COVID because of the Chinese reaction. But as soon as he saw the American governmental reaction, he was like, whoa, hold on a second. But there were a lot of other people, I won't name them all, who stayed on the cheerleader side behind the lockdown logic. And we were warning this is a disaster. This is a debacle. This is a political suicide potentially for Trump. And we ended up right in ways that we likely wouldn't have even liked to have been. But it was whoever. I tell people now, go back to see who was right on COVID from the get-go and on the lockdown politics from the get-go. That's someone whose instincts you can trust moving forward. Whereas anyone who wasn't quickly on that side is someone whose instincts you just can't trust. Doesn't make them bad people. Just means they have bad instincts about politics on key issues.
Now, let me tell you what I think.
Go.
I don't think it's that they have bad instincts on politics. I'm an expert. You've probably seen me tweet, and a lot of people here, about the fastest roll-up of power in history, right? So you may know that I'm keeping a chronicle of this, right? And I studied Thucydides. I probably read it in different iterations, 7 times, different translations. And now I'm really my favorite political scientist is Machiavelli. So I'm trying to study this from somebody who's got to tell this story, because historians will never tell this story because we're watching history being imprinted, right? We know what's going on, right? I think there were several issues, and I don't really think about, you mentioned Cernovich. I don't really, think about the Cernovich or people whether they were for it or against it, right? Because people were being overloaded, sensory overload, right? I'm very upset with kind of the conservatives, I don't know what they're called, like the constitutionalist type of conservatives, whatever they're called, because it was so clear that there was an encroachment going on. And I thought that my disappointment was that people weren't asking questions. And I think maybe the reason that you picked up on it is perhaps the same reason I picked up on it. I picked up on it from the economic aspects. How can we shut down the government, right? We have to, without some type of a commensurate analysis. But I thought about the questions that weren't being asked. Do you know what I mean? They weren't being asked. What made you kind of skeptical?
Well, I think it's a certain historical context. So and it's how you see and filter the world. And if you understand the history of how the state operates and the motivations of those who seek and successfully obtain power, it's where I agree with certain premises of Michael Malice and Alex Jones, which people may not put in the same category. But when it comes to the state, they both kind of are. And Jones's point has always been, while he takes it to unique places, has always been, you can't trust the people that not only seek power, but are successful in getting it, because it's going to be the worst amongst us. So whenever they're telling you anything for that they have to take away some right or privilege or opportunity from you on some pretext, be skeptical and be dubious because their intentions are never clean and clear. And their history is that they're likely doing it for their own power purposes, not to protect you. And I share that perspective. And Malice's same perspective, why is he an anarchist? The main core perspective is that when you give the state, if you give a small group of people a monopoly on both the right to violence and the means of violence, like nuclear war and mass war, what's the likelihood that that's going to be the best people? I mean, who's going to seek it? Who's going to succeed in seeking it? Is it really going to be the best amongst us? Is it going to be the nuns and the priests? Is it going to be the good folks? Or is it going to be the nastiest, most sociopathic, psychopathic people in that room?
Okay, so now let me ask you a question. am still very frustrated that there's never like you said, an interrogation, right? Which is what you did, cross-examination, right? There was never any cross-examination of the scientist. There was never any demands. They were kind of miscredentialing themselves, right? They were scientists in something else. And there was a lot of papers being published. However, none of them were being peer reviewed. They were just throwing everything out. And I would read the papers because I'm a loser. I was actually reading the papers. I'm such a loser that I was actually going through the citations. And I'm like, it was a loop. It was like one of those, you ever see that Twilight Zone episode, William Shatner, and he gets in his car and he every time they get, I think it was a car, he gets in a car and there's no way out of a town, right? He just endlessly goes in a loop. That's what was happening. So do you think it was because, did you pick up on it? There wasn't any interrogation, there wasn't any kind of dialectical type of discourse that was permitted?
Well, as a lawyer, I believe in the adversarial process, and philosophically, I share the adversarial process's ideas for getting to truth. And that requires, I always say that you can't change the fact that we are governed by motivated reasoning. But what you can change is what your motivation is, and thereby improve your reasoning. And the part of the adversarial process of the idea is you will give someone the motive to take something apart, to be critical, to be skeptical. And and if the adversarial process works, you subject them to having to introduce admissible evidence of a certain quality and credibility, and then allow both direct and cross-examination to occur and allow an independent jury to come to independent determinations. And our system is terrified of that en masse. And that's why the gatekeeper role of the institutional narrative for big tech and big media has become so critical. People are not allowed to have critical thinking, what I call true free thinking. So the people who are true free thinkers, like, it was fascinating, the group of people that ended up aggregating to raise doubts about the institutional narrative, often across parties, across ideologies, across backgrounds. But what they shared in common is they fundamentally believe in a certain empirical method of truth discovery. And they ask questions, they look at sources, they look at the things we're supposed to have been taught either in law school or in the academy, at least by traditional Enlightenment standards of inductive and deductive thought processes. But our system has divorced itself from that. It defers to authority for the sake of authority. It says, hey, I got a white lab coat or I got a black robe, do what I say or believe what I tell you. And I've never been since I was 3 years old, I was telling the Sunday school teacher I thought that was wrong.
So when people, and then there's a lot of questions here, but so when people, I never discuss COVID, I never discuss hydrochloroquine because I'm an expert on all these things. It's literally, Nancy, do I spend a lot of time doing this?
On what?
On my COVID log?
Oh, yeah.
Is it crazy?
It's a lot.
It's a lot. Every single thing that you see that's relevant to it belongs someplace in the fastest roll-up of power in history, because in 20 years, the elites will want to know about what used to be. We're watching the founding of a new country, and
a new world, really, because outside of a few countries, everybody went along with this insanity.
Yeah, it's a roll up of power. So one day there will be historians. I was upset with the scientists who knew better, right? And I was upset with the conservatives whose entire spiel and fundraising was we're not going to permit this encroachment on the Constitution. And then I was really upset with the college Republicans because I felt that they were so busy talking about socialism and just kind of spreading themselves so thin with attacking AOC. Who cares about AOC, right? Come on. They were so busy kind of attacking their big thing is socialism, right? Let's not become a socialist country. So they were just opportunistic and kind of ad hoc with their political philosophy, and they went along with it just as so I kind of fault them a little bit. So there's a question from Rising Serpent, and I'm very curious on your take on it. It's kind of a procedural thing, right? So Rising Serpent, thank you so much for being here. Robert, do you know Rising Serpent? Rising Serpent's awesome.
Yeah, on Twitter, yeah.
Yeah, Rising Serpent is awesome. So Rising Serpent's comments and asks, Trump's biggest mistake was thinking Fauci was a scientist and not a politician.
He knew better. He actually retweeted me because I said, if Trump refuses this lockdown politics and keeps us open, I'd build a statue to him in my front yard. And I'm sure he got a kick out of me. He said, don't worry, Robert, that's coming. And then a week later, he flipped. It was two problems. One was it was a problem throughout his administration. It's still kind of a problem. he surrounded himself with insiders. You can't be a change agent outsider and hire a bunch of establishment insiders. Fauci was a product of that. And there were people around him telling him, and frankly, Tucker Carlson made this mistake in the early part of the process, telling him this is a disaster, this is a debacle. They bought into the Chinese narrative, not second guessing why China might be spreading that narrative. Well, why is China allowing these things to be videotaped? Why is China broadcasting these things? You know, the lack of skepticism there was unsettling, but it was well done. And so they got to him and they said, look, you know, if you don't do what Fauci tells you to do, then, you know, there's going to be a bunch of dead grandmas on your conscience. And there was not enough people pushing back against it, saying, wait, his instincts were completely right. He was like, this is nonsense. This is an overreaction. This is not how we handle things. We can't do this. But everybody around him was saying, you're going to be held responsible for killing grandma en masse. And because he didn't have enough people reinforcing his instincts, it led, I think, to the decision that he made. He obviously figured out over time who Fauci was, but he had an instinct that he ran against these people. He said, we got to quit deferring to these so-called experts. They don't really know anything. They live in academies and they're politically manipulated. But once he got in, he kept a bunch of them in power. You know, it's an open guessing game as to why he made that mistake. I think that he ignored his own advice, which was that in the art of the deal, he said, don't hire people based on resume. Hire people based on skill. And once he got into something he never done before, which is run a government, he ended up deferring to the people based on resume and quit hiring people based on skill. And he's only partially appreciated how disastrous that was for him. Almost everything that went wrong in the 4 years of the Trump administration was the mistake of delegating and deferring to the resume crowd, the very people he had defeated in his campaign.
Yeah, Darren Beatty has said that same thing. And Amanda, I did something with Amanda Milius. She's awesome. And she was
great. I met her years ago with Cernovich in D.C. She's a sweetheart.
She is. And Cernovich, you know, you're bringing up good friends' names, so that's good to hear. But so quick question then. It's not a quick, it's $1 trillion question. Do you think Trump would have won had it not been for COVID?
Oh, absolutely.
It's a complex question. I'm asking you a complex question, so I want you to kind of consider the intricacies of it. Had it not been for COVID, was there going to be some other mechanisms that might have been employed to affect outcomes?
Oh, they definitely planned on it. They just didn't have enough of a pretext for it. They needed COVID first and foremost to sink his trump card, which was the economy. Without COVID, that doesn't happen. Without the lockdowns, that doesn't happen. And then the second, and COVID was the pretext for those lockdowns. The second is the degree of mail-in balloting and the degree to which they suspended all the rules. They needed the pandemic as the pretext to pull that off. They could have pulled it off in some places without it, but not this number. They couldn't have done it in Georgia and Arizona and Wisconsin without it. So they lose those 3 states, and that's all he needs. The margin was tiny in those 3 states. And that tells me my view going in pre-COVID was that he was a 75% chance favorite. After he went along with the lockdowns, I reduced him to a 33% favorite. I said,
well, that's what we're going to talk about. Listen to this. I never thought he would win re-election. I remember because you mentioned Cernovich and he's a friend. We after Host, we had brunch right outside of my apartment, and I said it was a good movie. By the way, he knows I was really.
Oh yeah, I was at the first preview, the red carpet preview in Hollywood.
Yeah. So I said, you know, they're never going to let Trump win re-election, because I kept a log back then also. This is what I do. I have a daily planner. I'm kind of neurotic with that, right? But this one is much more meticulous and unimpeachable than the other one. But I thought that they would never let Trump win again, ever. It was too much of an insurgent, you know, too much upset the apple cart, very unpredictable, unreliable. You can't really forecast what Trump is going to do 1 or 2 years out. And I think the biggest mistake that Trump made, knowing people should have told him he was never going to win, biggest mistake he made was not throwing grenades. People should have said, listen, you're here for 4 years, 0 chance they're going to let you win. Throw grenades. He didn't throw grenades.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, 2 things on that. One was anytime he pushed back at all on deep state foreign policy agenda, The next day, there was some leak about some investigation or impeachment or Mueller or something against him. So, I never had that high of expectations for his ability to pull that off, especially once he picked Pence as VP. That's why Nixon originally picked Agnew. As long as he had Agnew as VP, they were never impeaching Nixon. When he let Agnew get taken out and put someone else in, like Ford as VP, then he was guaranteed deadpan.
So I remember DMing you, or I think I was responding to something, and we're going to talk about your betting markets, because I'm going to tell you what I thought of your betting markets, because it was very interesting. I'll tell you about your betting markets, and then there's a question here, and we're going to get to it because it's an important question. With your betting markets, I say Trump isn't going to win, right? So then I look at what you were doing. You were looking at Trump. Remember, I know he's not going to win, right? And you were looking at Trump more from a betting and probability. You're looking at him kind of as a mathematical puzzle, right? You're a mathematician, right? And you're looking at him kind of, with probabilities and if this and this and and you played it right. I mean, in terms of playing a game and playing for an optimal outcome, which is where you bet this and you come out here, you 100% played it right. I remember even when you said sell into this, right? I think that your prism was a betting one. And I think a lot of people's prisms were like their own thing. Some people's prisms were like, there was just so many like marketing, and they would look at it from a marketing and they were like, Trump's marketing is great, so this is going to happen, and this is kind of the way people are going to react to it. So there's a question, and dude from New York City. So thank you so much for joining us. And you used to speak a lot about this. So I'm really curious. Very significant thing. What does Robert think of ACB? And that's Amy Cohen Barrett. Is that correct?
Yes, it was one of his great mistakes. So because I'd said from day one not to pick her. I had hoped he would not pick her. It was not, Trump, if he was going to go with his instincts, he wasn't going to pick her. And I thought he would. And I was actually surprised that he didn't. It was a sign of the degree to which all the advisors around him were bad for the most part. I said she's an authoritarian. She's a statist. She's a corporatist. She's an authoritarian. She's been that way her whole life history. Goes old money, New Orleans money. I mean, that's true authoritarian. These are people that had no problem with slavery back in the day. Some of them kind of regret its lack of current presence, if you know that community. I grew up, I was a scholarship kid to a Southern private parochial school, boarding school. So I knew these kids well, and I knew that culture well, and I knew never to trust anybody that grew up in that culture. And and then her pedigree was poor. She was a manufactured John Roberts type candidate who had played a certain game. You definitely can't trust those people. And we'd had 30 years of experience of that with judges. She had written very problematic rulings, celebrated the Jacobson decision, approved a lockdown in Illinois that was deeply problematic. And I got attacked. The whole conservative legal academy and their political allies are scared, terrified to second guess the Federalist Society because they have corrupted the appointment of officials. It's not a coincidence that Chris Wray was a Federalist Society member, Barrett's a big Federalist Society member, Roberts a big Federalist Society member. That's an association to distrust. Knew those people from law school. They're your Ben Shapiro type conservatives. They're untrustworthy and unreliable when it comes to core constitutional liberty. And in particular, I thought she would be untrustworthy on the elections, and especially on the pandemic. So I was yelling and screaming about her. Got attacked from a wide range of conservative sources, got personally attacked by a range of people, got bombarded with attacks whenever I made comments about it online, but it didn't stop me. And now I've been proven accurate. I mean, I said she's not going to bail you out she's going to be the vote to screw you on the elections, and she was. That she was twice, not once, but twice, that she's not trustworthy on anything. I mean, she just said that even in the church context where you thought she might be good, because she's an institutional Catholic, she said that maybe the governor of California could, in fact, ban singing in churches. Just depends on the scope of the evidence. This is not it was the worst appointment Trump made. It's on Trump for making it, but it's because Trump kept putting bad people around him. I mean, we can transition at some point in the election lawsuits, but he made the same mistake there. So I remain a fan of the man fundamentally because I believe he's well-intended and is a real change agent, as you mentioned. But there were certain techniques he needed to employ that he failed to employ by not having the right people around him. You can't be a one-man general in a war of this nature.
And one of the things that I remember, because I listened to your Viva Frei things, right? And you were excellent. You were perhaps the best out there, and he was, right? But he was more optimistic on Arizona. I was like, look, if it's not happened already, it's not going to happen. I think the statistician in him saw that possibility, and the statistician in him just wanted to play like the odds in the same way you were. Well, as I said, if he hasn't won Maricopa yet, they're just going to bring him in truckloads. They don't care. It's true, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, they got him on film in Detroit, bringing in the truck. When you're to that level, Richard Barris we've been telling everybody leading up to it. In fact, everybody who was following me on my locals board, we had a live chat that night, and I gave him advice around 1 a.m. I said, sell out of your positions. You've already made a lot of profit. Sell now, because they're holding ballots back in all the big urban areas. And maybe everything's above board, but that has been the history of elections that have interesting ballot counts, are when big democratically controlled counties, are sitting on counting their ballots and waiting for all the Republican counties to report first. And when that was happening at the same time in Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, I was like, folks, this ship has sailed. And I was like, sell now. And everybody who followed me made a killing. They doubled their money, tripled their money, because they got out of the markets before the morning came and the ballots, the magical ballots rose. Yeah,
you did really well. And Richard Barris, you guys were pretty much the only people I listened to. I think a lot of conservatives were kind of getting persuaded because of the Biden voter thing, which I thought was the worst campaign slogan. Those are Biden voters. That was going to convince nobody, because people know that those weren't Biden voters. These were just real anarchists. They're bad people. I thought that was very bad. And I thought people really felt that Trump was going to win after seeing all the protests and seeing all the riots. And when they called them Biden voters, I think that they sold themselves. They so much wanted Trump to win and wanted to find a reason for him to win and a way for him to win. You and Richard Barris did a really good, probably the best forensics I've seen on it. So have you seen any type of a repository on all the election? Is there any type of one cohesive type of repository that has all the reliable type of election irregularities that you find is a credible, authoritative source?
To some degree. There was someone who was actually a member of our locals board, the vivabarneslaw.locals.com, for those who are watching. We actually created a site called here'stheevidence.com. And he did it. What he did is he didn't make any judgment on the evidence. He just aggregated, here's all the evidence people have presented. Here's every complaint. Here's every affidavit. Here's every source that has cited this evidence. You can make your own decision and judgment as a jury. He did the same thing for COVID, by the way. And when you dig into the evidence, you find a very different story than the institutional narrative. My view was always that this is where, like, Joe Rogan is completely wrong, doesn't know what he's talking about. Now, that's what happens when you do that much pot as a teenager. But so Joe makes plenty of mistakes. But a lot of people that are following him, like your Jordan Petersons, your Douglas Murrays, not surprised Sam Harris, he's been off the res on this forever. But a lot of them are repeating these completely erroneous points about the election. The big issue with the election was, one, did you have constitutionally qualified voters? Were those the only ones who cast ballots? Second, did they cast a ballot in a constitutionally qualified manner? And third, was the vote counted and canvassed in a constitutionally consistent manner? And in the presidential election, that means they're doing so according to the rules passed by the state legislature, because that's who the Constitution under the Electors Clause authorizes to set the rules of an election. And in all three categories, Matt Brainer's work, Richard Barris's work documented, there were more than enough questionable votes of people who weren't constitutionally qualified to vote based on prima facie evidence and information. There was a substantial evidence that people voted in an unconstitutionally qualified manner due to the lack of meaningful signature match checks and other provisions that were meant to guard the security, safety, and anonymity and secrecy of a absentee ballot. And there are plenty of examples that both the count and canvassing of the ballots by election officials was not done according to the constitutionally conforming rules set by the state legislatures. And when Trump called me to get involved, I wanted those issues highlighted. He was on board with that, but he got a lot of pressure from a lot of places where it was sort of the populist right over the last 4 years. If you were someone who wanted to make a difference, you were often confronted with either an established insider telling you they had all the right connections to get something done when they were just going to betray you, or a combination of kooky people and grifters who, for their own motivation, wanted to pursue something when they didn't have the substantial grounds to get what they wanted to do. And I was trying to keep both of those groups who were banging on Trump's door and in Trump's ear out of the picture as much as possible, and to focus the attention where there was a very strong constitutional claim. And that needed to be shaped in the court of public opinion as well as the court of law. We helped draft a fantastic Georgia election contest that other people who are even skeptics of the election challenges agreed was by far the best. It just got completely silenced and shut out and shadowed by both the media institutional fake narrative that said you had to prove widespread fraud. No, you didn't. That isn't what a constitutional requirement is for a constitutional conforming election. And the sort of the Sidney Powells and Lynn Woods and others who were pushing, frankly, crazy conspiracy theories that I kept telling them would not be substantiated by evidence that people would find believable and credible. Now, I think some of them were well-meaning. I think they took the bait on a disinformation campaign. But if you're going to commit a crime, you always need a patsy. And I kept telling people the Dominion thing is a rabbit hole that's meant to distract you and detour you from the obvious reality, which now I get to say, I'm just saying what Time Magazine confirmed after the election.
That's a lot to take in. That's really interesting. That small cabal thing is crazy, right? It's crazy. I did a Periscope with Lee Smith. I don't know if you saw that.
Oh, yeah.
Killer moment when somebody asked him and he said, they want us to know. That's the whole point, is they want us to know. So it is really interesting. And I don't know Sidney Powell, right? I only followed it through you guys. I followed it through, Jack Posobiec. I followed it through I have a very small circle that I allow to curate my reality, right? And you're within that circle, so I appreciate you. So Sidney Powell, was there a way of pushing her aside? I saw a Stop the Steal thing that Ali did in Georgia. And that was the first time I saw that other guy, the lawyer. What's his name?
Lynn Wood.
And he would not stop talking. I've learned so many lessons in life. And one of them is when you're on a stage, you say what you got to say and you get off of the stage, right? How much did they actually interfere? Was there any way of pushing them aside?
Oh, I tried, because I was on the ground in Georgia. There were a bunch of us, Trump supporting lawyers who saw a legitimate constitutional question that needed to be litigated, that contested whether the election was constitutionally conforming and who it selected, and wanted the constitutional remedy, which was for Congress to have a meaningful vote, for the House to vote by state delegation. But we needed, multiple. And so we almost had control. And at the last minute, it was a combination of things that happened. If you're Trump, you don't know who to trust. So you've been betrayed by almost everybody at one level in your 4 years. You have people that go and write books right away after you make them famous, or you make them have public recognition. You monetize their potential audience with his brand. Then they turn around and betray him and write a book and sell out and make up stories. Melania experienced the same thing from people they thought were their best friends. So, Trump had been under attack before, but nothing like this. So he's in the middle of this, and it turns out his establishment lawyers are the people that are betraying him. They actually, in Georgia, they represented the Secretary of State who made all the secret deals, who created all the problems.
Okay, so knowing all of that, could this have been one when you said that Lynn, that there was a lot of distractions? Dominion was a distraction, which I thought also, because you're never going to be allowed to interrogate those algorithms, right? Everyone's been saying do it with Twitter and Facebook forever. They're not going to let you interrogate it ever. It's proprietary, the whole thing. Although you can't make numbers proprietary, they can somehow. It was just never going to happen, and it's an interweb, right, of corporations. It was just never going to happen. So with that aside, was there a way to win this in Georgia?
in all the states, because I was looking at Georgia and Pennsylvania, and was trying to coordinate the strategy for all of them and laid it out in a memorandum. And it was just focused on those three. Rebut the government, the media's institutional narrative says there has to be widespread fraud. No, there isn't. If you didn't cast a vote correctly, fraud doesn't have to be the reason why you failed to do so. Your vote doesn't count. That's the rules. If you end up at the voting booth an hour after the polling place is closed, you don't get to vote. Doesn't make it fraudulent if you did, but it means you're not constitutionally qualified voter. And if you're now there's some people who were, like, for example, some people may have thought they were qualified to vote, even though they were living at a post office box, which is illegal. Well, they're not. Some people may have no longer been residents who voted, but may have thought they were. Fraud was always a red herring. You didn't have to prove massive fraud. You were never going to be able to prove massive fraud because you have to prove intent, like taking the signature match context. You don't have enough signature specimen samples to look at to be able to come to a fraudulent determination. Rule is, does the signature match or not? It's the rule they're implying right now in California for Governor Newsom. And I just wanted the same rule applied. And it was clear. If you applied the same signature match rules by the same election officials that are applied to nominating petitions and recall petitions every day in America, then there's no way there were more ballots than the margin of victory in the swing states.
But could they win it?
I mean, if we had laser focused on that, then it would have put the courts and Congress in a different position. Because then you got an issue that everybody can see. Because what I wanted an audit. I told the president up front, I said, if I'm right, all of these states won't give you a party-observed signature match audit. If I'm wrong, they'll say, hey, come on in. Take a look at it. I mean, like with Dominion, you knew that was wrong right away because they were eager to do paper ballot recounts that would prove the machines weren't the problem. Richard Barris and I looked at it from the get-go and seen there wasn't a difference between where the Dominion machines were and where other machines weren't. So it couldn't have explained the election.
So now, and again, I rely on you. I rely on Will Chamberlain, although for slightly different things. He looks at litigation a little bit different with other type of stuff. With the Parler thing, he was really good. I don't know if you saw him doing the postmortem on the Parler lawsuit with Amazon. But now, if I understand correctly, there are certain instances where cases were well presented, but then the judges said it doesn't make a difference because the election is over.
Yes, because not only that, like in the Georgia case, the only election contest the president personally brought was Georgia. And that was carefully prepared with thousands of documented evidence showing all those three categories. People voted who weren't constitutionally qualified. People voted by a means that wasn't constitutionally qualified. And it was counted and canvassed in a manner that was not constitutionally qualified. And these are standards, by the way, that have been set up by the United States Election Assistance Commission and international election observer standards that have been established for more than a decade. So what they did in Georgia is they've delayed the case until after the electoral count occurred on January 6th. And so we didn't get a chance to have, and it was illicit what they did. But that would have been much harder to pull off if we didn't have to deal with the fake media narrative that was easily being propagated because Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani and Lin Wood were playing into that narrative. It was a disinformation campaign from the get-go, which you could see not only by the lack of evidence if you looked at the real scope of how the votes came in, but if you also looked at simply that it was self-discrediting. It was the kind of thing that when you say it, and you can just talk to the mirror, and if you hear it and say nobody's going to buy that, not seriously, not a court, not Congress, they should have known better. But here's the thing: Sidney Powell, no election experience of any kind that I know of. Rudy Giuliani, no litigation experience. I mean, he hadn't been in court 25 years.
You called it. Will Chamberlain called it. And again, I rely on you guys to curate my reality because that's really what the Twitter feed is, right? Is to curate reality because reality is so fragmented and difficult. And you guys definitely called it. I actually had an argument on a Periscope with Will Chamberlain about Lin Wood. And then about 2 weeks later, I was like, man, I'm sorry. You were right. I really owe you this one. You were really right about that. And then we're gonna move around a little bit because I want to go back to COVID for just a moment. But so with ACB, because a lot of people were asking questions about ACB, has she been a disappointment? Because I saw that Philadelphia or the cases that were brought there were kind of tossed. And I saw Scalia had some type of a dissenting opinion. I didn't read it. But has she been and Kavanaugh made a peculiar, was it Kavanaugh who just did something peculiar? But have those Supreme Court justices been a disappointment where you can say they did this wrong?
Oh, absolutely. Barrett's been the worst. Barrett's been Kavanaugh. I don't attribute blame on Trump because that was a quid pro quo. Kennedy, according to multiple sources, Kennedy said he wouldn't step down unless Kavanaugh was the pick. It's just some of us thought there was a chance for him to jettison Kavanaugh without that, but that's another story. Gorsuch has been mostly solid, though he clearly ran and hid the first time around in the elections, but he was willing to hear it the second time around. Thomas, as always, has been the best justice on the bench, comes from the most working-class populist background, so not a surprise. Gorsuch has been decent. Alito has been decent. Kavanaugh has been erratic, and Barrett's been mostly bad. One good decision on the New York church case, a mediocre decision on the California church case, and terrible on all the election cases. And just this week, her first signed opinion was all the different excuses the government can have to hide information from FOIA. So she's just going to be a corporate authoritarian statist. Watch her strike down laws down the road on that try to restrain big tech. She's just going to she'll be probably good on Second Amendment, probably good most of the time on church issues in the First Amendment, but will probably be bad on pretty much everything else from a constitutional civil rights perspective.
And then I want to get to a question that's coming up, so I'll give you a preview of the question. But before we get to the question, because it is very kind of procedurally kind of important, was there an alternative strategy for Trump to get to an optimal outcome where he wins? But will history going forward, let's say 10 or 20 years, when it does do some type of a review of those cases, right? And there are going to be elites who are going to thumb through those cases that really are inquisitive about it, right? How is history going to look at them as having been wrong, or how is history going to look at those decisions?
That'll be an open question. I think the pandemic decisions, lockdown decisions, will be judged harshly by history because they've resurrected the trilogy of infamy, the Jacobson decision, the Buck decision, and the Korematsu decision, which are considered three of the most horrendous decisions in the history of the Supreme Court. And they're citing some of those decisions in issuing their current ones. So I think the court will look very badly in retrospect on that. On the election issues, I think it depends on the perspective. But there were a lot of people. I like the show The Gaggle, which has Peter Lavelle and George Samueli, because they provide sort of an international perspective on domestic American politics. And their point was, whatever decision the Supreme Court made, playing Pontius Pilate and hiding from the consequences of the decision made the Supreme Court look like a worthless institution. And I think that's where they're going to be judged the harshest. That whatever their decision would have ultimately been, failing to provide clarity and hiding under their desks it did its most damage to the credibility and the integrity of the Supreme Court itself.
We're going to get to Reed's question. And before we do, the way that I'm going to kind of get in there and kind of intercept between what you just said and Reed's question, and I really appreciate and I really like that picture that Reed has chosen, is I don't know how history is going to look on the Supreme Court cases, because the people who are going to be reviewing it are going to be the elites, and there's going to be a lot of academic interest amongst a certain group, amongst a small cabal, right? There's going to be a bunch of Kabbalists that really want to look back. I think with COVID, I disagree with you. And I study this. I really disagree with you, which is why I'm writing this history. I'm writing this history because we're watching history imprinted. Did you see Jack Posebek's Periscope where he walked around the green zone? Did you see that thing that he walked around? Did you see that? It looked like the green zone, right? It was craziness. And remember the National Guard that was there? They're imprinting history. Our kids are going to study that, and there's no way to stop it. It's unfortunate. Our memories are not going to be reliable enough to be able to tell our grandchildren. So that's why I'm collecting this. So, Reed Troutman, thank you so much for joining us. And again, I really like that picture. So if you want to share with us who that is, who did that, really, it's very thoughtful. It's like being in a museum, right? Reed Troutman says, if Trump would have refused the lockdowns, they would have been able to successfully hang every COVID death on Trump. Even after he went along, they tried, but didn't have any sting.
Well, I mean, they did that anyway. So they were always going to do that. So they were always going to blame Trump. So look at, there was one counterexample of Sweden. And ultimately, doing what happened in Sweden led the Swedish population to believe it was absolutely the right decision. So, and that's a liberal-leaning, statist-oriented society. So my view is he was always going to be blamed for the deaths no matter what he did. So why get the suffering of losing the economy, losing the election rules, and being blamed for the deaths? My view is take the hits that they're going to make. They're going to do what they're going to do. The people that are going to hate you are going to hate you. But if he would have kept the economy open and precluded the easy pretext of changing the election rules in all of these states under the pandemic pretext to do so, then he's in much better stead and much better position. They could stick whatever. They always did that. Like, that was the naivete. I mean, Boris Johnson has tried to play this game in the UK, and all he's done is lose all the people that he could have had otherwise, and he didn't gain anybody that didn't have with him in the get-go. Nobody that wanted to judge Trump for the deaths was anyone that was ever going to vote for him. People that could have voted for him were the people who lost jobs and businesses because of going along with lockdowns, and a whole bunch of people voted who otherwise wouldn't have voted, but for those rules changing, which were much easier to accomplish under the pretext of the pandemic, especially in Wisconsin, Georgia, and Arizona.
I'm going to ask the follow-up to Reed's, and so hopefully you can appreciate it in the best spirits that I'm going to assume it might be the follow-up, what was your thoughts on the way Trump kind of articulated his own policies? I felt he had a real difficulty kind of articulating any type of. I thought he did really good. I mean, I have a timeline on everything, and I actually thought he did really good, but he didn't convey that. He wasn't persuasive in it.
Because his politics are instinctual. And I said from the get-go, I wrote a piece in American Thinker summer of 2017, went on Fox right before Trump was on, and on the same topic, which was Trump is a great instinctual populist. He doesn't have the intellectual architecture of populism. He hasn't spent his life thinking about it in terms of translating it into policy and then translating those policies into personnel and then translating both into points of persuasion publicly. And so he was great when he just responded to his instincts. He was vulnerable when he surrounded himself with incompetent personnel, delegated policy to other people, and then is trying to translate these, sort of bastardized versions of his ideas to the public. And so when Steve Bannon it was clear that Bannon was going to be on the out, said, okay, I was like, you should bet against Trump right now because he needs to replace Bannon with someone like Bannon. Doesn't have to be Bannon, whatever issues Bannon has, but he needs more people who can put policy and personnel into the populist infrastructure that his instincts reflect. And without that, he was always going to be in trouble. And unfortunately, that proved prescient.
And what a great follow-up question this is, right? So Chris Woblington, thank you so much for joining us. And that's a cool picture. Says, yes, Trump would have much better trust instincts if he's elected next time. Do you think his instincts would be better? And do you think he's going to run again?
I think it's 50-50 on whether he runs again. There's good steps he's made since he's left, and there's bad steps he's made. The two people that are Bill Stepien and Justin Clark, who have been identified as deciding who he's going to endorse, they were both the complete incompetent rubes who ran his campaign and created major problems in the election contest afterwards. And so these people have no clue. And that's why he's endorsing mediocre people out of Kansas. He's jumping on the Tim Scott bandwagon. Leave that to the very end of the train. This is a guy who was privately sabotaging him all over D.C. now for years. And so he almost endorsed the wrong person in the Ohio Senate race. On the good side, Don Jr. is much more involved. And it appears Jared Kushner is sort of stepping back. He doesn't want to get involved in that side of the equation. And that's not really Kushner's skill set, in my view. I think he's misjudged in a range of ways. But there are places Don Jr. is within his family. The only person that has Trump-like instincts with consistency. I mean, Laura Trump is very good, probably the best candidate of the group, but is Don Jr. Don Jr. has understood it from day one, and that's the good sign. But he really needs to keep improving. So if we see more and more influence of Don Jr., that will be very promising for 4 years from now. If he continues to have the Bill Stepiens and Justin Clarks and, he's got Jason Miller as a spokesperson. That's that idiot that knocked up campaign staff while he was married during the campaign while visiting strip clubs at debates. This guy should be maybe have him as the doorman at Mar-a-Lago. Don't have him be your spokesperson.
Okay, so I'll tell you what I think. Right? You ready for this? Zero chance he's going to run again. Zero chance. He's lucky if he can, and if he and his family can stay out of jail. It's really bad. I know the Southern District of New York. Nancy, watch this. Nancy, do we know Letitia James?
Oh, yeah.
Do you think that she's a good attorney general, or she's going to let other people do the work?
Oh, definitely let other people do it.
Yeah, and Nancy said she's going to let other people do the work because she's not, And we know who those other people are. Trust me, we know who those other people are. Nobody is going to ever put a file in front of her. They're just going to let her stay in front of the camera, and that's about it. Nobody's going to put a folder in front of her with any type of case information. But the staff that has been kind of surgically inserted there over the last 15 years, and all the resources from other DAs that I know for a fact that they're drawing on, is going to be a whole bunch of hurdles. So I don't see Trump running again. I don't see the Trumps running again. I think the oligarchs really are going to. They need to convict somebody of something to say that there is justice, right? Otherwise, there's no justice. They need to convict somebody of something, so that they just convicted the former president of France, right? He's going to jail. America needs that type of the appearance of a restoration of a renewal of justice, and it's going to be unfortunate. So, a philosophy. What's that picture? Don't give up the ship. That's very cool. Very cool. I remember a quote about that once. But so a philosophy says, I'm very interested in what your response, Robert. The math and data analysis says Trump won.
Some of the math was poorly done, to be frank about it. Richard and I broke it down in great detail, and what became clear was that wherever there was unusual mail-in balloting is where Biden got his unusual margins. But it wasn't related to machines or anything like that. It was unusual mail-in balloting patterns. So this was like even in states that weren't competitive, like Tennessee. You would have demographically comparable counties. And I established how you could look at whether an election could be contested before the election, because I'd been doing this kind of litigation for 20 years, was how you identify where you might have a problem. And I said one of the things you look at is you look at demographically comparable precincts or counties within the same state, but also across state lines where appropriate, and see if there's unusual patterns that don't make a lot of sense outside of some unusual method of voting, means of voting, people voting. And the pattern everywhere, between North Dakota and South Dakota, between East Tennessee and Middle Tennessee, all over the place, was wherever there was unusual surges in mail-in balloting, disproportionate, they somehow always tended to vote like 90-95% for Biden. And that's where the constant real question arose. That was the big issue. It was not the machines. It never was. And that was why it was always a trap. And that's why they're all facing, bankrupting lawsuits now, which I predicted that was going to happen to them too. But
yeah,
they just didn't listen, unfortunately.
And there's a question actually, so I'm going to include this. John Galt, 1957 AR. I'm not sure if that's the year you were born. What's the chance Dominion blinks and drops the Giuliani Powell lawsuit on legal discovery? What's that? Tell me what that means.
It was all a setup from day one. They have all the evidence. I mean, Powell said obviously false things. I mean, I kept telling, I was like, Dominion's not owned by Smartmatic. Dominion was not owned by the Venezuelan government. Dominion has no ties to Cuba's cat. These were ludicrous claims. This was a disinformation campaign out of the Q world that was meant to discredit Trump's election contest, and it succeeded in doing so. And it succeeded in enraging some people to do something stupid on January 6th. So now I still have my suspicions about Q. The idea that was some rando on a message board, I don't think so. But that's for another story. People can go to the Hush Hush episodes on vivabarneslaw.locals.com and see what I really think. But they set them up perfectly. And notice they waited. If they were sincere, in my view, and wanting to protect their reputation, they would have sent out those letters right away. Instead, they just let Giuliani, Powell, and Wood bury, dig deeper and deeper and deeper. Mike Lindell. And, the people think, oh, they're really scared of what the discovery is going to show. No, they're not. I got to see it up front in Georgia. Everybody was eager to point to Dominion. And the corrupt officials down there said, yeah, why don't you dig deep here? Because they knew nothing was there. When I was saying, hey, no, I want to look over here, they're like, hold on a second. What?
That phone call that Trump did, and there's a question that we're going to get to in a moment. So the call that was recorded that Trump did into the Secretary of State of Georgia, right, is was Trump actually being responsive? Was that was that kind of the proper?
Oh, that was a settlement conference. That was a court structured settlement conference, mediation conference. So that should have never, it was a crime to leak it. And yet a state official has now admitted his agency was behind leaking it. And nothing he did could be criminal. I understand that the prosecutors down there want to do something with it. It would be a crock. Here's the other problem. If they go down that path and do these show trials with Trump, they're going to further enrage half the country, number one. And number two, Trump's smart enough in a criminal defense case, he'll hire lawyers with my skill set. And they'll lose. And then what will the narrative look like? Then the narrative will look like Trump was right all along. And the Democrats and the media were lying all. This is why it's a big gamble.
Can they win? Can they win? And I want to get to this question because it's an intro. Oh, it's from Reed again. But can they? I think they can win against Trump just by attrition. That's my experience within kind of the adversary.
Yeah, but it's Trump. He's a tough guy to beat by attrition.
I'll tell you that he is. He is. I did business with him in the 1990s. I bought his Trump bonds. I actually made money on them. But although my interactions with him, I don't think were. He didn't want to give us his. He did not want to give us his tax returns. I swear, it's the craziest thing. In any event,
he's a smart man.
Yeah. Actually, very nice. But so Reed Troutman says, aren't they doing an audit in Maricopa County?
Yes, they are. And they're going to get to see the actual ballots. Because here's the other thing. All these ballots are digitized and scanned. And one of the things I was demanding from the time it got hit the ground in Georgia is the Secretary of State promised in 2018 when he wrote that $106 million check to Dominion that the great benefit of it was he was going to get to print the ballots to the world. And the whole world could look at the ballots. He could do it with one keystroke. And he's been scared to do it this entire election. Why? That was my other problem. Is like if there was nothing wrong with the signature matches, why were they scared of a party observer independent confirmation of those signatures? If there was nothing wrong with the ballots, why are they terrified to print them? Why did Maricopa County go to great lengths to try to hide them from even the state Senate in Arizona? So something is amiss. It's just not the computer Dominion rabbit hole that people jump down. It was elsewhere. And again, if you're going to commit a crime, you always need a patsy.
So, Wizard Predicts, thank you so much for being here. Do you know Wizard Predicts?
Oh, yeah.
They've got an awesome website. And I believe it's wizpredicts.com, right? Is that right? So if I'm mistaken, and hopefully we'll be seeing them in Revolver because they're awesome. I read an op-ed that they did that was really good. So I was only watching, I don't even know what Kraken is, right? But Wizard Predicts says Kraken torpedoed the provable violations, made all the cases toxic in court. What does that mean?
Sidney Powell said she was going to unleash the Kraken. And my favorite meme was this little tiny octopus walking along saying, I am Kraken, hear me roar. Because one, she didn't know what she was doing. She's never done election law in her life. Number two, it was clear disinformation campaign. General Flynn's people got taken in by it too. I was like, this is all insanity. That was like the biggest problem right out of the gate is you need to show a vote discrepancy between Dominion counties and non-Dominion counties, between Dominion states and non-Dominion states. There was none. So that was dead out of the water. But if you knew anything about elections, you knew there were no German servers that the CIA was secretly raiding and the white hats were involved. And they know that China's connected to Iran and China secretly bought Dominion through this, thing. And then the ghost of Hugo Chavez and Fidel Castro are hanging out in the background. The reason why Michael Tracy could mock it as a grift is because it looked like a grift. Now, I don't think it was intended to be one by Mike Lindell or he was the one giving the money by Sidney Powell or Lynn Wood or any of them. But they took the bait because they were susceptible to it. QAnon was a brilliant disinformation campaign for a particular audience, and it worked, but it was always hogwash. But yeah, Wizard's exactly right. I kept screaming at it. I left the Georgia election dispute in terms of a formal role because I was like, I'm not being anywhere near this. This is a disaster. This is a debacle. This is self-implosion. This is self-immolation. And I hoped, and it triggered a little bit. It got Sidney out of a formal role for the time being, my objection, but it didn't do enough. And to be frank, I put a lot of this on Rudy. Rudy should have known better. Rudy knew he hadn't been in court since 1992. He didn't know the difference between rational basis and strict scrutiny. He was one of those prosecutors that everybody underneath him did all the real work. And anybody who knew about Rudy's cases knew that about Rudy. So he should not be the public face. Fine, do that. Don't take over the cases as your one last cash grab. I understand why Trump trusted him. He knew Rudy the great prosecutor, Rudy the mayor, Rudy the famous lawyer.
I remember that. Yeah, I remember that.
But I was trying to tell Trump's people. But I was new to Trump world. I had been peripheral for 4 years, got involved at this point. So I don't blame Trump for. Well, I'm going to go with a guy that I've known for 30 plus years who's got a big reputation. I like what you're saying, Barnes, but I know this guy. And I was like, okay, no problem. I was like, but this is where it's going to go. And everything I predicted turned out true. But it's unfortunate because we could have had a constitutional resolution that reaffirmed the constitutional process, whichever way the election, even if it said Biden is the next president. I wanted us to use the courts and Congress in the constitutionally ordained way, and we abandoned that. And the institutional narrative has built this gaslit the world into some alternative truth that half the country is never going to believe.
And I want to make a correction too. I normally have such a good memory, so I'm very frustrated with myself when I don't. And I said whizpredicts.com, and it's not. It's not. So it's electionwiz.com. And
yeah.
The thing is, I automatically get it fed to me. So it's
hey, here. I just go to my bookmark link, so I don't remember the title is anymore.
I know. So
I made that mistake on Gateway Pundit. I didn't realize it's the Gateway Pundit.
Yeah.
I was like, I didn't have my link, and I was trying to find something. I was like, where the heck is this Gateway Pundit's not the Gateway Pundit? And then found out later.
Yeah, so I get because they do a lot of capsules, and with the political type of stuff, that's really the way I want to take it, right? Like, so you guys are, and I include Election Wiz within that as well. You guys are really, I think that's the role of Twitter. I think that's kind of a moral obligation in a sense, right? Is helping people make sense of reality, right? And curating type of reality. So I get the Election Wiz capsules. They pop up for me. So I didn't get a chance to see it. I don't get a chance to see Election Wiz. That's not the way it pops up for me. But they do like capsule news. So maybe you could write something for them. Do you know that? That would be awesome. Would you do that? Would you do that?
At some point, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So it's wizard_predicts is their Twitter handle, and their website is electionwiz.com. And you really should, because Amanda Milius is going to write something for them also.
Oh, that's cool.
I know Election Wiz is really smart. We've DM'd, and there was a comment that I saw that was between them where Lemon Minty, and I think I've seen that name before. And what a wonderful picture that you have. Really nice picture. Says, "Yep, it was if it was a planned psyop meant to obscure."
It worked perfectly for that purpose. I told people from day one that's what it was. And it's unfortunate. I understand why Trump reacted the way he did, but the lawyer should have known better. Sidney should have known better. Linwood should have known better. Rudy Giuliani should have known better. And I put a lot of the blame on them for not knowing how to guide it. Now, like some people have got false blame. Mark Meadows was trying to do great work. So he was trying to keep the balance. And I understand Trump's position, but I put the blame on them, including Rudy. And we had Bernie Kerik and some other people that were involved. I was like, you guys, they were not within their element. Bring in people that are.
I don't know. So I'm going to ask you an antagonistic question because someone's got it here, but it's not so. I like those type of questions as long as it's not. I don't like bad language. I really don't like bad language. I don't like anything inflammatory. It shows kind of like a lack of awareness, right? So it's yours, right? It's C. Worley 2007. And also, what a wonderful picture you've chosen. So C. Worley 2007 says, Robert won't say it, but Trump asked him to help in Georgia.
Oh, yeah, I said it earlier. Yeah, the president called me personally. And that's what I'm talking about. So there were a bunch of us. It wasn't just me. So that we're on the right page, that we're leading a great effort. And people can see it if they look up the Georgian election contest, what all that collective work worked for. I won't name some of the other people because they want to stay confidential, though it's now known Cleta Mitchell. Fantastic lawyer, fantastic, real true believer. And this is why some of the excuses I hear for Trump's appointments are, well, he didn't have access to those people. Yes, he did. There were plenty of people willing and ready and able to help Trump throughout his entire administration. There were people that he could have used in the PR side of the equation, the Cernoviches of the world, the Posobics of the world, that they didn't reach out to, that they didn't even coordinate with. This was just poor strategic decisions. This is the reason why Cernovich was ahead of the curve. He got a lot of crap for it, but he was right. And he was right about a lot because he was witnessing it. He was seeing, Amanda was witnessing it. That's why part of the reason why she left.
I'll tell you
and
what.
did the great movie Plot Against the President. But
I
it's like,
know.
these are people saying, here's what we need to do. Here's what we need to do. And it's Trump's mistake that he didn't stick with his instincts and went with resumes. And part of that was he, choosing between corrupted insiders and crazy grifters is the wrong choice. There's a lot of smart strategic people that are on your side between those two choices, and he sporadically went with them.
So
And it was his greatest weakness.
I did a Periscope with Amanda Milius, and we were talking about, I guess, one of the leaks that Trump got, or very early on, 2017. I think that Cernovich said, well, Mike, right? But Mike said that they weren't hiring MAGA people. They weren't hiring the people that were helpful, really, the feet on the ground type of people. And the real operational people who really helped him, that they weren't bringing them in, and he thought very early on that was gonna be very bad. And I think he even named some names of people who were kind of acting as obstacles. I'm going to continue on, and it's Lee Chowman again. So you really have to tell us who that picture is. And there's so many people here. I don't want to neglect anybody, but hopefully their questions are helping this kind of this thing, because we're all trying to piece it together, right? So is there a continued effort to expose the fraud? It's critical for reform and undermining the efforts of Democrats.
Well, the best way to do so is to change the laws, and a bunch of state legislatures are doing exactly that. Well, the Democrats are trying to remove that power from them by passing H.R. 1. So that's where the real battle is. There's a couple of suits pending. There's the Arizona paper ballot research. I'll be talking to some people that will be part of an election integrity project with Richard Barris and some people who want to help organize that in the next couple of weeks. And I plan on using variations of the Freedom of Information Act to be able to document a lot of records. And Steven Crowder's still doing cool, fun stuff.
Yeah.
And so there will be, but it will probably be a year and a half away before we're able to get all the documents, because they'll fight a lot of this to build the information, but help prove it for historical purposes and for election law reform purposes to the degree we run into hurdles.
And there's a question here from Brian. So Brian, thank you so much for joining us. And I like their kind of like thing, right? That's pretty cool. That image, right? So and I know you mentioned Matt earlier, and I'd like to have also a better understanding. So Brian says Matt Braynard and a bunch of people are digging in on the election. So Matt Braynard used to work for the Trump campaign. I don't know like the whole story behind it.
Correct. So he's a data guy, and he just jumped on this. He knew how to prove stuff. He knew what kind of evidence you would need to have an inference, prima facie evidence of election irregularities that could bring in question and bring in doubt the outcome of the election, which is the legal standard for election contests. Like a bunch of people made a big deal about Rudy saying we're not alleging fraud. What he meant was fraud is not a required element for any election contest. And the media misportrayed that deliberately. And then a lot of other people have in bad faith misquoted that and misattributed it. But Matt Braynard did great work, spent a lot of time. Cleta Mitchell was a leader inside trying to tell the Trump people to bring in Matt Braynard and use his work. They were slow to do so because of people like Bill Stepien and Justin Clark, who he's now delegating who he's going to endorse to. These are two people that are corrupt and untrustworthy.
I want to get to this question. It's very interesting. Anna M. and then a bunch of numbers. I used to try and say the numbers, but it's too difficult, right? It's kind of difficult to say that. So Anna M., bunch of numbers, and a very nice, wonderful picture. So thank you. Says, then what was the purpose of the movie, The Kill Team? I'm going to respond to that first. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but I spoke with I know a lot of tech hackers, right? I know a lot of election hackers. I know a lot of anarchist hackers, hacktivists, and a whole bunch of people. And they're very good at kind of cataloging certain flaws and certain 0 days and certain other discoveries, because there's kind of an ethical code that they have, and they've actually got tickets. They, believe it or not, they actually create tickets for these things. And one of them told me 3 years ago, hey, Trump's, I can't share it actually, but unfortunately, Trump's team wasn't quick enough to respond to it because it wound up becoming a headline. But I will say that The Kill Chain was really good because it showed, I think it was Harrod Hearst, was that it? It showed kind of the ease of being able to hack the machinery and how easily it could kind of be hooked up to the internet, and that there really wasn't any fail-safe or catch mechanisms.
Yeah, and what people are confusing is that the means of doing something would mean that's what happened here. that for a lot of reasons, if you're going to try to fix an election outcome or fortify it, to use Times words, if you want to fortify the election in a certain way, you don't want an easy paper trail. And trying to go through the machines is very hard because it's sporadic. It's different machines in different places at different times. There is no, like, the whole Sidney Powell nonsense that all these machines were all connected to the internet and they sent their votes overseas to be counted. None of that is true. That's not how these machines work. These machines are individually hackable, and you can do coordinated efforts, but it's very hard not to leave a paper trail. Much easier just to get a bunch of votes, but just to flood the country with ballots and then flood the ballot box with those ballots and not have meaningful measurements about whether the people voting or the means by which they were voting were constitutionally qualified, because the count and canvass is not done in a constitutionally qualified manner. That's a much better way to try to fortify an election than to try to mess with hacking machines in one jurisdiction. You got to do it another place and do it with the right time, and not do it in some place that the paper ballots don't show up some anomaly. That's much trickier. The difference in the U.S., we don't have the same voting machines in every jurisdiction. And consequently, that makes it very hard to steal an election through machines. So people are confusing the fact that these machines are hackable with whether that's what happened in this election. All the evidence I've seen is that's not what happened in this election.
Yeah, and because I collect all this type of stuff right now, and part of my collection is about the election, which is kind of it's very easy to get lost in those intricacies of my own creation. So I try and be careful with it. But actually, we're going to go on to this question, because then I'm going to ask you, because it's going to come up right after it. Because we're going to go back to Georgia for a second. We're going to go back to the case that you kind of whatever it is that you wrote up, right? So Rising Serpent says, if you were Trump's lawyer, how would you have done this differently?
Well, for a period of time, I was. And for a period of time, it was our strategy that was in play. And it was to, one, get ahead of the court of public opinion, but also the court of law, which is to say, we're only focused on these three areas. Did only constitutionally qualified people vote? Did they only vote by constitutionally qualified methods? And was the count and canvass of the ballot constitutionally consistent? And identify all the circumstances where that didn't happen. And like in the signature match was the easiest and the biggest one, because there were going to be, if the same standards were applied that were applied to Kanye's nominating petitions that kept him off the ballot in Indiana and Virginia and other states, there was no way there weren't more than 1% of the ballots whose signatures didn't match. And that was enough to change the outcome of the election. A Democratic expert in Arizona, when they were following my methodology, they got independent party observer experts involved. The Democrats' own expert said more than 10% of the absentee ballot sample that he looked at, the signatures didn't match under the same standards used for nominating petitions. Well, that's 30 times more when you project out that the margin of victory in Arizona means you have to throw out the votes. The second thing was to condition people's mind in advance that the solution was not with state legislatures trying to do something because they were unlikely to do so, or with state election officials trying to do something because that was unlikely. The constitutional remedy is, if you have questions about the election, then the remedy is the House votes by state delegation. Conveniently for Trump, he had an advantage there. But my view was establish that there was unconstitutional methods of voting, means of, or voters or counter canvassing that took place in these enough states that matter, and then let the House vote by state delegation as who the constitutional winner is. And people were on board with that strategy until, frankly, Sidney Powell came in and blew it up.
And there's two questions about that. So I'm going to do a follow-up to Rising Serpent. And again, it's their question, so I'm just kind of like doing the follow-up, right? I'm like that guy who, when someone's winning really big in blackjack, I just kind of go up behind him and I put my like chips down, right behind him, right behind him, right? So there was several months ago, it was announced that there was that election integrity project. Do you know what that is?
Yeah.
Where there was a lot of wargaming going on. And I think it was even during one of those war games when the New York Times journalist exposed himself. I think he was a participant in one of those war games, and he was a role playing, I think, Trump at that time. But so the resources that the opposition had vastly blew out the what Trump was allocating to this. So did Trump have enough resources to be able to battle this? Did he have them? And if you were his lawyer, right, you still have to do all the hiring and recruiting really, really quickly and staffing up really, really quickly.
there are two issues. One is I thought he did. I didn't know until after the election that his lawyers had been paying no attention and been asleep at the wheel, and in part because a lot of them were conflicted in a lot of states and at the national level. And again, people like Justin Clark had a major role in this. So, I mean, why those people are still involved is beyond me. But that was why they were completely asleep at the wheel leading up to the election. Now, he did have enough resources after the election, but the Republican National Committee was diverting funds that was supposed to be going into the election contest into other activities. They used the election contest to raise massive amounts of money and then didn't spend it on what they actually said they were going to spend it on, with the truth buried in the small print when you gave the cash. So there was enough cash if it had been properly allocated according to donor intentions. The Republican National Committee, Ronna McDaniel Romney and others, diverted it away from what donors gave it to, so there was inadequate funding for the election contest itself.
But then you still have to, if you become the lawyer, right? If there is funds available, right? If there is some type of an allocation that they can pull out, right? You still now on a very short notice have to do a lot of hiring. I mean, just that in itself is very, very time consuming. So you have to kind of recruit them, staff them up. And
the great thing is there were, a bunch of lawyers that were in the administration who took time off just to volunteer their time. I mean, the absurdity was these people were paying money out of pocket for hotels and food and transportation, while the Republican National Committee was raising $250 million for supposedly fighting the election, that almost none of it went to fighting the election. So we could have, I was putting together a team. I had a bunch of lawyers willing to help me out all across the country. I mean, I've done these kind of things on quick basis. What I do, it's a mercenary model of legal practice. It's to be able to parachute in at the last minute, staff up, and go to war. And we were ready to rock and roll. And we were that close to a totally different story taking place.
wow.
But for, that's the way history goes sometimes.
Yeah. And there's a question here, and I'm going to put it up, but then I'm going to say something first. Is I supported Ali, right?
Ali was well intended. So there was
he really was, and I think he's from his own experience in 2018. He saw the Republican apparatus levered against him, and so in 2020, I think he was building up the architecture for. Stop the Steal was building up an architecture that was very durable. So even if the outcome was against Trump, it could have been the host for whatever happens next.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, what he and Alex Jones and other people were doing was very sincere and straightforward. It was just part of the public attention to this got hijacked by a disinformation campaign that high-profile lawyers bought into. And that was, and whenever I raised questions, I got tons of crap for it. And so it was unfortunate, but that's, you got to give the system credit. I mean, to your point that you believe the system ultimately had too much power and resources dedicated for Trump to overcome it. Ultimately, that turned out true. But it turned out true in part because people around Trump took the bait on disinformation campaigns, which are always critical. Like I said, if you did commit a crime, you got to have a patsy. And you got to watch out for the disinformation campaign because that's intended to disguise the true culprit of the activity.
So Mark Pensarn, I want to thank you very much for being here and a very nice picture as well. So I'll tell you my perspective on this. So Mark Pensarn says Linwood's tweets were psycho crap. They didn't help normal folk get the message. Mark is right because I'm the normal folk and Nancy's the normal folk and we're very supportive. At the same time, it's difficult for us to have an intelligent conversation with our friends about it when we're competing with those type of messages that were off the wall.
Yes, completely. So, and I had dealt with Wood in some other contexts. So I was very public about that Lynn was not a reliable source on this. And everybody in Georgia kind of knew that. Anybody who knew the backstory knew that. And so it was just, that's why I put a lot of the blame on Justin Clark, Bill Stepien. They played a key role in this going AWOL, and on Rudy. And to some degree, the White House counsel. There were some people around Trump who were, in my view, establishment insiders who were dismissive of any questioning about the election. And consequently, they made themselves incredulous to Trump in the process because anybody could see this was not a regular election. Maybe Joe Biden is the most popular human being in American history. And if you believe that, God bless you. But for the rest of us watching, it's like,
Yeah,
Maybe not.
I knew it was gonna happen. I knew there was gonna be a lot of irregularity to the voting, and I knew that the Republicans would cave in, and they caved in with Alley, right? How they abandoned Alley is ridiculous, right? They just completely caved in, and I understand some people had ethical arguments against him, and also personal. So I'm just gonna put those people aside because that's just one or two or three people. The entire establishment knew that if you take out Stop the Steal, you have no hopes for 2021 once Biden is in to be able to mobilize people, recruit people. And
yes, there's a lot. I've dedicated several of my hush hush episodes on vivabarneslaw.locals.com precisely to this topic because it's not one we can talk in detail about on YouTube anymore without censorship or the rest. So it's people can get my opinions there. And I laid out a lot of this from the get-go. That a lot of things were peculiar in how certain narratives were conveniently developed after the election.
And so, Kay, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for joining us from YouTube. And even better, look at the little puppy. You see that?
Yeah, adorable little dog.
It is so cute. And I'm that guy who pets every puppy, so I'm ready to. Right? So, Kay says, listen to their oral arguments. Very telling that Chief Justice Roberts' questions are head spinners as usual. And he said that the man's pretzel logic was baffling.
Yeah, but that's Roberts. He's always been an institutional insider, an establishment hack, untrustworthy on almost every area of case law that you can have. And some of us were saying that at the time. But again, the conservative legal establishment doesn't broach any dissent when it comes to the Federalist Society. And it's a major problem that somebody needs to fix moving forward. Say no more deference to whoever the Hoover Institution wants, or whoever the Federalist Society wants. In fact, if you're a Federalist Society member, it should be disqualifying, in my view. Pick people that have nothing to do with that. This is why the left does better. They don't have one group that monopolizes control, so they're much better at picking people that will be reliably loyal to them on the court, as Obama's appointees have been, as mostly Clinton's appointees were. But both W's and Trump's appointees were often not loyal to constitutional conservatism in a meaningful way, and definitely not to constitutional civil liberties and civil rights.
Real Omar Sharif, thank you so much for joining us. And I like that picture. Pretty cool, right? Says, and I'm going to respond to this just a little bit in part, and it has a lot to do with you and I were so visible against kind of the failures to have any type of interrogation, right? Or economic models commensurate with shutting down the economy. So Real Omar Sharif says, how could Trump keep the country open if major states were going to shut unilaterally? I did a thread about how New York allowed for cryptic transmission. And I cited, it was, it's like 40 tweets, right? Because it's part of my log. So I just kind of copied and pasted and put it in it. And it was plenty of instances where de Blasio and Cuomo downplayed COVID from the very start. They said like it's going to be nothing. De Blasio was hanging out in Chinatown. He went to Main Street, which has a very large Chinese population. And even though everybody outside, because they regularly wear masks because it's a cultural thing in some cases, ritualistic almost, he was downplaying masks. He didn't do anything with the transit, and that was allowing cryptic transmission to go throughout the entire country. So if you take a look at a map, everything radiates out of New York. So Real Omar Sharif, now asking this to you, Robert, says, how could Trump keep the country open if major states were going to shut unilaterally?
Put the pressure on him for that to occur. So he could have pushed back from the get-go. Originally, he said he was going to make certain determinations. And if he said we're going to keep it open and push that narrative aggressively, like what happened in Sweden, the ability of a lot of those states to shut down would have been more restricted, and it would have only been big Democratic states that did so. So people would have seen in live time, Republican states, I have a job. Republican states, I have freedom. Republican states, my rights are protected. Democratic states, I'm not. And the president's on the side of those Republican states. It would have drawn a clear contrast that he tried to draw at the end, but by that point, his message was too muddied. And as you pointed out, it was too muddled to actually resonate and fully get through. I mean, it partially got there. I mean, they did have to change the rules of the game for Biden to win. But I don't think it would have been within the margin of fraud in the first place if he had taken a different path.
I was disappointed with the Republican National Convention. I enjoy rhetoric a lot, right? I'm sure you do as well, right? Because that's,
Oh yeah.
persuasion is a big part of it, right? And I was very disappointed that he had himself speaking a couple of nights and his family, and that he had Charlie Kirk, right? And I'm not a big fan of that type of college Republican. I'm just not. But Trump already had that vote. But I really wanted him to have like Victor Davis Hanson or somebody who could really talk about policies. And it really goes into this. So we're back to Kay. So we get to look at the doggy again. What do you think? And Kay says Trump's first debate performance was not good with early voting, and that hurt him a lot.
I think that's a popular perception, but I don't think that's true. I think that his intention in that first debate was to destabilize Biden, and I think he did so. And the people who didn't like him beforehand still didn't like him. People who liked him were no less turned off. The people who had doubts about Biden, those doubts were reaffirmed. I mean, that was Biden's great chance to make working class inroads. And as we now know from the election results, he made none. He lost ground in working class communities. So I think that was Trump's objective. I think the big miss in both debates and the whole campaign and most of the RNC, other than Trump's speech, was he had two huge winners. He had started no new wars, and Joe Biden had voted for every war in history. And he had been good on trade, and Joe Biden had been horrible on trade from a working class economic perspective in the Midwest, particularly in the upper Midwest. He almost never talked about either issue throughout either debate or the rest of the campaign. Instead, they were campaigning, begging suburban moms to come home based on riots, hoping that your Bill Kristol Republicans would come back on the fear of socialism. That was a complete waste of time, complete waste of money, complete waste of effort. He should have turned up and tuned up his working class base. And if he just would have made slightly more inroads into the working class community, he wins. He wins outside of whatever's happening with the rule changes. But that was a major miss on his part. And again, it's because his whole campaign team doesn't believe in Trumpism.
So Lemon Minty, again, thank you for joining us. And I get to see that picture again. It's a very pleasant picture. So thank you very much. Says, and this is a real problem, Robert, says Trump's social media supporters are smart and informed, but what about the general population?
It varies. A lot of them actually do get it. I mean, but the key is repetition. So Trump's message would get out. Like that's what 2016 proved. That to some degree, 2020 did prove that, given how close it was. And he got 75 million votes. 20% increase, the highest number of votes anybody other than Joe Biden to ever get for the presidency. But the key was if he would have repeated the anti-war mess, there were plenty of people on the working class Democratic side and the general population that did not know that Joe Biden had a long history of being pro-war, did not know Joe Biden had voted for every bad trade deal in history. And that was key. I mean, they knew that about Hillary because that was baked in the cake with her, thanks in part to Bernie and other factors. But that didn't happen in the Democratic primaries in 2020. So people did not know this about Joe Biden, and that was the big miss. You can break through the gatekeeper institutional narrative controls with, especially Trump could, if he repeated the same points over and over again. But that's where his failure to do so on those key issues hurt him in the end.
And Roman75, thank you so much for joining us. Roman_75, and it's a follow-up question. Isn't that cool? Because I'm like looking at the questions here. And what a nice picture. That's nice, right? Don't you wish you were there? You see that?
Looks like Big Sur.
Yeah. Is it? So it's really a follow-up question to what Lemon Minty said. Going forward in 2024, if Trump runs in 2024, how will he be able to get his message out?
The problem with what the machine is doing is it's forcing conservatives and independent thinkers to create their own networks of information. And I think that they're going to regret that in the end. So things like locals.com is exploding. And it's a creator-curated, creator-owned communities. And what happens if that continues? What happens if campaigns start using like locals.com to set up their own little campaign community and so forth? What happens if people set up independent networks, exit ramps from big tech across the board so that they no longer need Twitter or Facebook or YouTube to communicate? They're using some combination of Rumble and Gab and locals and things like it. Then the system can't even manipulate narratives like they can now. Right now, they have most conservatives on their platforms so that they can still really subject them to extraordinary manipulation, both in terms of information and emotion. What happens when they're no longer on those platforms, no longer subject to that? I don't think they fully appreciated what they're doing. I think they think they'll always have a monopoly because they've always had one. And I think that's a mistake. And I think they're going to discover that the hard way in doing so. I mean, it's we'll see. I'm more of a white pill on that issue than some other people are. But I think that I think Trump will be key to monetizing those independent networks outside the system to achieve that precise objective for either Trump or a Trump-like candidate to utilize to completely circumvent the gatekeepers. Because everybody's seeing they need to get outside of the gated institutional narrative, and more people are going to give them the means to do so because of this massive censorship and suppression campaign by big tech.
But can't the elites just cheat? I don't want to say cheat again. I've got to be very cautious with my words. But can't there also be irregularities that are not adequately investigated going forward into 2024? Should that be the case?
Historically, there's enough pushback from the public that leads to legislative reforms, more public awareness, more proactive legal work, that it's tough to do the same thing twice like that. So is it possible? Absolutely. There's something to fight against, no doubt. But it won't be nearly as easy as 2020 was.
I hope you're right. I really do. Election Wizard, thank you so much again for joining us. And I also want to remind everybody their website is electionwiz.com. And that's because I've read, I get the capsules, right? But I've read their op-eds. They DM'd me one and I was so impressed. So they should really write some more, and you got to write for them. So Election Wizard says, often when the elites have railroaded the populist in the United States, the elites have soon faced a massive populist backlash and been thrown out. Too much roll of power this time. What's your prediction?
That's what I think is coming. I think a major populist backlash is coming.
Really?
So I think that, and they're going to fight by every means and tool, by hook or by crook, to try to prevent it. But this is where I agree with Michael Malice, who's writing a book called White Pill currently. And his view is a rising empire doesn't look like the Green Zone from Baghdad and have a dementia candidate for president. And that's the sign of a declining empire, a dying empire that knows it's dying. And I think at some level they do. And this is when they lash out the most. But I do think it's going to trigger a back. I've seen it from all kinds of places. People who weren't even active before, didn't care about politics, so enraged by what the system is trying to do that they're finding any way conceivable to engage. There's going to be people who finally realize how powerful local government can be because they actually control how elections are done. That are going to be running for little positions, city council, county commission. The way for a populist revolution to work, it needed to always be bottom up. It could never succeed top down. And they're forcing that to happen. And that's where I think they've overstepped their bounds. I think the system would have been better off with a second term of Trump than what they're about to face. Oh, yeah.
People have no idea what's already hit them. They haven't seen evidence of it. I call this Dark City. Everyone hopefully has seen it, but people haven't really left their housing yet. What is that?
Great film. I love Dark City.
Watch the editor's cut. I actually spoke with Alex Proyas. We had a really cool couple of calls, and hopefully we'll do a Periscope with him. We'll see he's got something new coming out. We're going to do Dark City too. That's what I was trying to persuade him to do. So I view things a little bit differently. I don't think that there's any way to, I'm very bullish on America, right? Everybody knows I'm very big on America, very bullish. I think the stock market's quadruple from here, go way, 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 way up, easily. Discussion for a different day. I do the investor series, but I think that we're seeing a transformation of our people operating system, and we're seeing a new country being founded, and that history will show that America kind of failed, and the founding fathers and mothers, or however they identify themselves, right? The new parents of this new country are going to be the Mark Zuckerbergs, the Elon Musks. They're going to break up all the states as much as they can. They're going to break up all the municipalities. They're going to suck all the resources out of it. And I can't say that that's a bad thing. It's just a failure because our tribunes have failed us so much that I don't think people are able to convene to mediate the cruelty of the elites. That's what I worry about more, that the elites are unchecked. That's what I worry. I don't worry about the future. I think it can be okay as long as there's a way of mediating what I know is coming. That's what I worried about. So here's a really interesting question. Lynch 123, who says not my president. It is your president, though. I know, doesn't that hurt? Lange 123 says FBI is corrupt and they are making up all this crap. Unbelievable.
Yeah, but they've woken up tons of people. I mean, I used to only have allies on the left and the real independent, old school Alex Jones right at being skeptical of the state. At being skeptical of law enforcement, particularly the FBI, particularly the Department of Justice. They have woken up so many people. I mean, the number of red pills they've been dishing out over the last 4 years is a record. Even the fact that your ordinary person, you can get into with an Uber driver and he can talk about the deep state. That used to be an eclectic, esoteric, intellectual conversation 10 years ago. So that's why I'm optimistic on that side, because I think self-education is the key to self-empowerment. And I think that's happening at a record-setting level. And more people are seeing what he's seeing, that you cannot trust the seventh floor of the FBI, that we have a re-Hooverized FBI, that we have a corrupted Justice Department, that all of our institutions are corrupted, both morally and intellectually. And the election of Trump was a symbol of that. He was an effect, not a cause. He was a symptom. And he was potentially, and still is potentially, part of the solution. But I'm optimistic of that. People understand this now in ways I had to, could never convince them of 5 years ago.
And I'm not sure if Wiz Predict saw this also, because it's really interesting. So I'm not sure if the Election Wizard also saw this, and I think they included it. I think I saw one of the capsules in them. But did you see what just happened in Germany, where they passed legislation that allows them to surveil a dominant oppositional party? Did you see that?
Yes. Leave it to the Germans to be coming up with these kind of rules.
But they're a leading indicator.
Oh, yes. Well, remember what Merkel said at the beginning of the pandemic stuff. We have to go back to some of the things we had done before during World War II.
Okay,
she said that.
There was two different type of speeches she gave. One was March 11th or 12th, depending upon your time zone, because I have the German ones as well. And the other one was March 18th, and she referred to it as a war. And be cautious when Germans say anything about war. And I've got informants on the insides in a lot of different countries, and they're very helpful to me by doing certain things and sharing with me certain contextual type of frameworks. So are you worried that that's what's going to happen in America? I
think they're going to try. They're absolutely going to try. But I think they underestimate the spirit of ordinary, everyday American people.
But that green zone stops a lot of everyday, ordinary American people. And
it does, but it also shocks them into consciousness. And that, I think, is a problem for the system. I don't think they understand that. I don't think they haven't studied enough of American history to realize what happens when you expose yourself so brazenly, so boldly. That's where I am. I'm on the Michael Malice white pill side of that equation.
Well, here's a question then for everybody. And I think about this a lot. And it's Dark City, right? If you take away all of history, right? You wake up, the quarantines, they go on, they throw out all the books and everything. How can you restore what was? How can you ever restore a republic or restore any semblance of what we knew once?
Because of like Dark City, somebody wakes up in midstream, and then in the process, he wakes up. Everybody starts waking up, more and more people around him, until everybody's woken up.
Yeah, so I hope so, because Alex said that Dark City was actually a very optimistic movie because humans win. And
yeah, that was my view of it.
Yeah. So a whole bunch of numbers. So and a whole bunch of cues also. So but I think that was just incidental, right? But 12 cues. And Barnes, Robert, did you ever find out what really happened with your Twitter issues right before the January 6th protests?
Yes, no doubt. Right. I was being very critical of that. I was in D.C. actually on January 6th. Was at a chief of staff's office of a cabinet officer, watching it all unfold. There were people that had originally thought that I would be there. I had been warning about issues, so I wasn't there on the ground at the Capitol, thankfully. Because they would have, they're already trying to accuse Alex Jones when he was trying to stop all of it right on the ground, on video, on tape, trying to get people out, trying to get people to stop. And you still see false news stories accusing of him. They definitely wanted to go after him for this one. he was one of the leaders to preclude and prevent it from getting it to happening to where it went. But yeah, very peculiar. My Twitter came down 3 to 4 days before. Right at that time, I was being highly critical of Lynn Wood in particular, and some other people who were pushing narratives that I thought could lead to a problem like this, a false flag kind of event, potentially, or an event that the wrong people are blamed for it and the wrong attribution takes place, and that it's misused and abused for impermissible purposes. Glenn Greenwald is doing a great job documenting this right now. So I never did find out. And the hacking explanation has made less and less evidence for that over time. So it's another one of those interesting coincidences in life.
Have you noticed that Darren Beatty and Glenn Greenwald seem to have aligned? Have you noticed that? They've aligned in a very comfortable, harmonious type of way where they're contrary agents, which is the best thing that they can do, right?
Agreed. And it's examples like that show the system is facing problems they don't appreciate.
Here's a really it's Anna again. That's awesome because I see the questions, right? What does the youth look like? My 17-year-old daughter needs to focus on to keep her freedom. What does my 17-year-old daughter need to read and to focus on to keep and preserve her freedom?
Self-education is self-empowerment. So all the skills of survival in the modern age, try to divorce yourself from big tech as much as practicable and possible. Start to go to places like Locals, go to other places that are exit ramps from big tech, learn survival skills. Those are always useful. I mean, those are useful just in case your power goes out like it did in Texas, or like you all of a sudden get locked down as we did throughout the whole rest of the country. Shows the utility of that, of being able to survive. Always have a plan B, an exit plan if you need to, and you can do that at different levels. You don't have to be, I do it for clients that are higher end clients, but people can do it for anybody can do it. There's ranges. I mean, you have different levels of utility, but learn the same. Think of it as you're in 1929 Berlin. How do you protect yourself? How do you keep yourself aware? How do you exit if you need to? To build those plans now. You want to have those skills before you need to use them, not try to develop them after you need them.
What would you be reading?
Say it again.
What would you be reading?
Oh, for books,
yeah.
I have a whole book review book list that's on my the Viva Barnes Law .locals.com site. It's on Goodreads too. It's a whole list of recommended books. Fixing the System is one I recommend because it's about the history of populism and independent populist ideas for solving problems. Hunter Thompson's always a great read because he describes what happened in 68, 73.
But it's very interesting because for a 17-year-old, they need some kind of foundational. I like philosophy. I like history a lot. So when people ask me, I think of the beginning of history really started with Homer, right? My son loves Homer, me not so much, but it really did kind of begin there. The history of, particularly of literature and of mythology, really did kind of start formulating right there. And then I think of Thucydides, right? I think of Alexander the Great. I think of Rome, and I just kind of move up sequentially until we are kind of where we are now. So I want everybody to read like Machiavelli. I love that stuff. Such a batter. Read Discourse on Livy. Did you ever read that? Discourses on Livy?
I don't think I have.
Okay, so he takes, and hopefully everyone's going to read it, because what he does is he goes through Livy's history of some of the Romans and Roman times, and he does kind of postmortems on what were the kind of trials and what was the tumults of that time, and then kind of contemporizes it in the early 1500s Florence, and gives the prince advice on how he could resolve those same type of things and what is it that history taught us. So we're not trying to replay history, but he's kind of like playing a game, and he's examining all the alternatives from kind of what's happened before. And it's brilliant because you also learn a lot about history. You learn some really cool stuff.
Yeah, I mean, Homer's always great for tactical strategy. I always recommend the trilogy of Machiavelli's The Prince, Sun Tzu's The Art of War, and Robert Greene's the Laws of the 48 Laws of Power. For understanding American politics, I always recommend Kevin Phillips' Emerging Republican Majority because it gives the long history of American politics and how the different groups have responded over a wide range of time over American history. Because even though it's written about 1968, it's really all of American political history up until that point. And if you want to understand how American power works in general, I always recommend the American Underworld trilogy of of James Ellroy, Bloods a Rover, The Cold 6000, and for whatever reason I'm blanking on the first one momentarily. But that's a great text for power. You can superimpose that script over a wide range of events and be able to refilter and see the world anew. It's a red pill, if you will, and books like Fixing the System are a white pill.
And Noodles for you. Thank you so much for joining us. And I recognize that picture. So thank you so much. Says that's why they hate the new freshman GOP. They came in mad like us.
No doubt. And the populist base is expanding, getting more and more electoral power. And it's only going to continue to expand. And it's even influencing aspects of the judges. Trump did make some very good district court appointees, sort of scattered the good versus the weaker appointees. But judges like Judge Stickman gave one of the best decisions explaining why the Constitution cannot condone these lockdowns, doing the interrogation that you talk about. He actually provided the only real trial that's taken place in the lockdown context and pointed out the evidence simply didn't support it under any legal method of evaluation. And so, that's a promising indicator. So there's plenty of people willing to fight back. And so I think that's why I'm confident as to the future. I think I have like a few more minutes.
Yeah, and we're going to start winding up but there's so many. Didn't I warn you? Didn't I say there's going to be a lot of questions? And
yeah, no problem.
They're cool questions, and I do want to respond to this. So, Rip Dizzle 01, Adam, what are you both most optimistic? I'm going to answer that quickly because I already kind of went through it. I see a transformation in our people operating system, right? I've talked about that for years, and now with Trump in there, we're seeing them kind of Trump washing, and they're using tactics and a strategy that is different than had Hillary come in. Hillary would have been much more assertive, and she really would have been the spokesperson, like a model for this type of stuff, while they recognized that Trump was obviously adversarial to what their plan was. It's his style. But I'm very excited about Space Force. I'm disappointed in Biden, some of the things I've seen already. I do have to tell you. But what that means is that Space Force, American Space Force, is still going to exist. It's just that it's now going to be embodied in Boeing, Lockheed, Raytheon, SpaceX, Relativity, all the downstream companies. Those are our companies. They are not going anywhere. So I'm very optimistic if you're, that person's 17-year-old daughter, if she's reading the right books where she learns how to communicate, she learns how to think. Kids today are not learning how to think as you and I think both do, which is to have a system view of things, to think on a very complex. You and I have both worked in complex organizations, and we've had complex things. So most people today just their thinking, no matter how smart they are, is kind of an assembly line. It hits their station, they stamp it, and it goes away. That's all they kind of know. So if a kid is acquiring system views, and if they can acquire a mentor that's going to kids these days absolutely need mentors. If they can acquire a mentor that can help them understand kind of Epictetus, right? How to survive within a corporate environment, because the world is going to be, as Last Refugee always says, Sundance always says, and Lee Smith always says, we're seeing a classist system installed, right? So you've got to make sure that you're going to be on the high end of the classist system, and America is always going to have upward movement, but you've got to make sure that you've got the skills, and the emotional skills, the intellect, the emotional reservoir, the intellectual reservoir to be able to move up. So I'm fine with it. I'm just not nostalgic about what was. Robert, your turn.
I describe that as sort of Ralph Ellison from The Invisible Man, how to learn to curse them with your yes, sirs, in terms of how to survive within the system while you try to change the system. But what I'm most optimistic about is simply the conscience and cognitive capability of the ordinary everyday person, the everyday human being. So years ago, there was a great founder of a demeaned society that was historically misportrayed later. But he was like, and that was a time of greater corruption, where you had, the ages of princes and popes that governed us. And what he said is that, it didn't matter how many schools they shut down and how many books they burned, because there were two schools of learning you could never shut down and you could never burn. And that was the rights of man and the archives of nature. And that you can use your cognitive capacity and capability to witness the world around you and listen to what your conscience directs you to do. And in the process, that has always been the greatest restriction and restraint on evil succeeding. And that's why I have ultimately great confidence in the human conscience and the human capability of keeping the world a good place. That I believe, despite the obstacles that we will face, that the world will end up a good place for ourselves and our future generations.
And we're going to go to locals in just one moment. Oh, I got the wrong one. I wanted this one. Apologies. So Happy World 65. And again, what a nice picture that is. So thank you very much. It's always nice when you see those things, right? It kind of gives you happiness. So it says, we have a lot of problems in UK. I did a Periscope with Darren Beatty. I've done two. And somebody asked him, I think it was Tracy Futures, asked him why he was so critical on the UK. And he thinks they're really evil because they've given away so much of their freedom.
No doubt. And, but you also have great people like Peter Hitchens and Paul Joseph Watson pushing back against that. So and it is a country that did actually pass Brexit and undermine the whole EU objective. So I'm more optimistic. Right now it's pessimistic, but long-term optimistic about the UK's ability to return and restore its liberty-oriented focus and perspective going forward.
We're going to take a look at locals, right? So now I've got to, how do I do this? I think I got to go like this and then go like that, right? So now we're going to take a look at locals. And while I'm getting it up and setting it up here, I'm a technological wizard, right? But while I'm doing that, can you tell me and tell everybody else why you and a lot of people are now looking at alternative platforms?
My view is what really gives value to big tech. Unlike almost any monopolist of the past, which actually had a monopoly on resources, a monopoly on contracts, something like that was sustainable, all of big tech depends on content creators giving it its value. The moment the audience leaves, the moment the content creators leave, they lose and fall apart and disappear overnight. They very much are kingdoms built on sand. And so we need alternatives because they're emotional manipulators, they're algorithmic idea shapers, they are speech suppressors, they are everyday censors, and they can memory hole and delete you overnight and sort of disappear you like you're a dissident in Brazil in 1970. And so we need exit ramps from their paths to destruction, self-destruction, really. And locals is one of the best exit paths, exit ramps that exist because it's decentralized. The creator owns all the information in the community. The creator is the only person who can censor. The creator is the only one who can moderate. The creator gets to keep and own all their own content. So there's no centralized monopolistic source for any kind of suppression of information at all. And so it has the tools to make available the benefits of social media interaction without the big tech monopolist manipulation taking place. And so that's part one. And then, so for Viva and I created vivabarneslaw.locals.com. It's like your neighborhood bar. I describe it as like a colonial tavern from the Revolutionary era that was critical to incubating the ideas that led to the American Revolution, or the salons of old Europe that were critical to unleashing the Enlightenment. It's the same sort of construct that it's built to do, where we can create our own communities, where we can have curated conversation of consequence, where you talk about going to certain places to curate what you see and understand to get an accurate filter on the world, independent and separate of the manipulation of big tech and big media. That's what Locals provides the opportunity for, and for creators to create. And we put a range of content on there that's exclusive to members. Some of it's available to anybody that's a member that's not even a subscriber. Some of it's available to the subscribers, because the utility of subscribers is it involves some investment that allows it to reciprocate, to really build the community. It also provides the monetary means to be independent and separate from big tech. It also provides a paywall that effectively kicks out the trolls and the other people that are acting in bad faith. So I think it's fantastic, and I think it's a key solution to the problems we currently face.
Locals is really cool. I wasn't sure when you first did it, why you were doing it, because I liked your YouTube stuff. That stuff was awesome, right? And then I saw you went over to that, and then I saw other people started also migrating to other platforms, the talking ones, such as that. I think it makes you very resilient. I completely agree with it. Here's Locals. Here's your Locals. This is cool.
How do you change the world? One person at a time, one idea at a time. And once upon a time, we had places that made that possible, communities of conversation. Once upon a time, we had communities of conversation where the intellectual became accessible, where the only gatekeeping concerned civility, not ideology, where such communities of conversation could thrive and all people were invited, and the only qualification concerned their ideas, not their identities. We want to help recreate those communities of conversation again, and we can help make that possible by you making that possible.
So we have created this community on Locals where we can have a dialogue, a community based on ideas and not ideology. You could support Robert and I in the content that we create. You can have exclusive conversations amongst yourselves. You get access to exclusive content from Robert and I. It's going to be a wonderful place. Sign up. Viva Fry, Robert Barnes on Locals. Booyah.
The shit turned off, and it actually really is cool. So for me, these are all like lunches, and I do the investor series also. These are all lunches and dinners with friends that I get to, hang out with, and I really liked what you were doing on YouTube with Viva Frey, who I never heard of before, and he does have a lot of energy. He's also very good at communicating, right? He's very good because I've seen him do some longer form interviews. He did one with Mike Cernovich I watched. He's a lawyer also, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so it was a corporate lawyer for a long time, then an everyday commercial lawyer for a long time, and he provides sort of daily white pills. So there's like a Joy de Viva series of videos that we do every day that are from his archive of just just celebrating everyday life, Joy de Vivre, kind of appreciation of life, of all these different little visual moments that he's captured over the last half decade plus. Of his friends and his family in ways that remind us that to celebrate life, no matter what difficulties or circumstances we may be faced. So it's been a lot of fun, great community, fascinating people. They lead me to help curate content, help create content, lead me to sources and stories that I might have missed otherwise. So it's great. We have live chats, we have conversation, we have posts, we have exclusive videos, you name it. I find it to be great fun, and I think it's a real practical solution for people that are seeking an escape from the big tech guarded gates.
Did you know that Anna had a subscription to it?
No, I didn't. That's fantastic.
Isn't that really cool? And that's going to be, this. You said only an hour. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I did.
And I knew that it was going to go over. I was like, everybody always tells me an hour. I think Amanda Milias, I said, it's going to be like an hour and a half. We went 4.5 hours.
Wow.
I know. You didn't know that? 4.5 hours.
I did not.
Yeah. I've only done one. It was like an hour. Because there's a lot of good questions, right? Were you
yeah, of course.
Isn't it interesting?
Oh, absolutely. It's been great fun.
Yeah. So we're going to close up with that comment. And what that means is, like, every time people see this in the future, right, that it's going to be frozen in that moment. Isn't that cool?
That's fantastic.
That is really cool. So I am going to say goodbye to everybody. And thank you, everybody, for allowing Robert and I to spend this time and for us to be the guest on your feed. Thank you so much.
Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you. And I'm going to press this button. You can't see it, right? I'm going to press a button, and then everyone's going to go away except you and me, right? So when I press it, everyone goes away. You stay here. So I press it now.